Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was Forced to Face His Past? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku liked getting lost in things, like the sound of his keyboard when typing out a new research proposal about a hero's quirk, or the chatter of a stadium when the voices melded into a single hum. He liked that. Usually, life was too loud, too mundane, too invasive. It left him with earbuds in almost constantly to drown out his thoughts of those that tried to invade. If it wasn't music, it was a show playing in the background while he did homework. Anything to keep his mind from wandering too far. He tapped a pencil against his lip, considering the submitted design from an incoming first year. It was a difficult balance to stay true to what the student wanted while also making it a functional costume. Personally, he felt that the colors were too loud and overall lacked cohesiveness with the student's quirk. Surely someone with a quirk that gave them the ability to control water would want that incorporated into the overall aesthetic. He decided not to question the choice and instead submitted a note for a future consultation. Midoriya, a voice sang out. Izuku rolled back from his chair to look at a grinning Hatsum standing in his open door. More babies? More babies, she squealed, tossing a stuffed duffel bag into his room. Midoriya sighed, looking longingly at his half-finished report before standing to investigate the newest inventions. What did you come up with now? She rummaged through the stained and torn duffel till she pulled out a pair of seemingly normal gloves. He accepted them gingerly, not hiding his suspicion at all. Clearly annoyed with how long he was taking, Hatsum reached forward and shoved Izuku's hands into the gloves. Then she reached over to this bed, snagging the pillow and holding it to her chest, a mad twinkle in her eyes. Punch me! Wah! Punch me! As hard as you can. Izuku eyed her and the gloves wearily. With them on, he could feel some structure between the layers of fabric. Even if most considered Hatsum to have a few screws loose, he trusted her designs. Fine, but if you get hurt, I'm not taking the blame. That seemed to spark more determination in her eyes. She gripped the pillow tighter with an eager nod. Izuku threw a punch that should have just knocked Hatsum off her feet. Instead, she flew through his open door and across the hallway to the neighboring door. Izuku blinked in surprise as Hatsum sat up with a grin, her goggles sitting askew. Hatsum! That was incredible! She shot to her feet and pulled Izuku's gloved hand to her face. Even better than I hoped for a first prototype. It's awesome, Hatsum. He pulled the gloves off and handed them to her. How do they work? That fire sparked in her eyes again. I've been experimenting with this new synthetic material that hardens on impact. She bent over to dig through the duffel again. I combined that with some of the material that's able to absorb kinetic energy, you know the one, which makes the gloves roughly double the impact intended. She shot back up with a wide grin and shoved Izuku's head into a roughly shaped helmet. This is baby number 10367. Izuku shifted the helmet around. It was slightly too big and fell too far forward. What does it do? This one is perfect for patrols. It scans the opponent and uses an algorithm to determine what quirk they most likely have. Izuku's eyes widened as the screen on his face brought up statistics about Hatsum. Quirk analysis complete. Sight enhancement 90% probability. Wow, Izuku breathed, watching as the helmet scanned his room while he turned. How'd you get your hands on the code? A girl has her ways, she answered coyly. I'll come bother you more when I finish the others. Izuku handed the helmet back and picked up his pillow off the floor. Still doing your report? Hatsum asked, leaning on the back of his desk chair to look at his computer. Yeah, it's due tomorrow and I have some proposals due, too, so I'll be up for a while. Hatsum peered up at him in the dimly lit room. The sun was nearly set now. Do you want company? Her voice lacked its usual chaotic mirth. He smiled, stepping over to flip the light on and close his bedroom door. I'd like that actually. She grinned, pushing off the chair. I'll get snacks. A moment later she was gone, leaving the door cracked for her return. Izuku sunk back into his chair, heaving a sigh as he looked down at the work still needing to be done. His phone and earbuds sat on his desk tempting him, but the room was silent. He couldn't even hear his neighbors. A rare occasion. The only thing better than chaotic noise was absolute silence. Not that he couldn't handle the in-between. School and social situations required that of him, but those chances when the thoughts around him were too distorted to grab his attention or there was no noise at all were blissful. His fingers were flying across his laptop when Hatsum returned. She waltzed in, popcorn in one hand and a pizza in the other. She wasn't gone long enough to bake a pizza though. Another baby, she reasoned, setting the pizza and popcorn on his nightstand. Oh, how does this baby help the heroes? My creativity won't be stifled, she declared, taking an indignant chomp at a slice of pepperoni. Heroes are always busy. Besides, who doesn't need pizza baked in half the time? Izuku rolled over to his nightstand, snagging a slice for himself before rolling back. Never said it wasn't genius. She grinned and flopped down into his beanbag across from the TV. Any first years with interesting quirks? This one I'm working on is a water type. He sorted through the stack of paper till he found the report from the quirk database. They can only control liquid forms of water, so their suit design incorporates a lot of places to hold water. That would be heavy though, so it's been difficult to fit those containers in a distributed way that isn't bulky or heavy on one part of the body. He tapped his pencil against his chin. Began thinking, I have a baby that would work perfectly for that. Hatsum sprang from the beanbag chair and dug through the duffel. She pulled out a spidery contraption. It's still a rough prototype, but this is meant to distribute weight over the body. She handed it off to Izuku. I was planning to pitch it to some rescue groups. Izuku held up the spindly wire frame. How much can it distribute? Hatsum shrugged, frowning at the prototype. At this stage, only about 50 pounds. That's more than enough. I wonder if the costume developers have anything similar to this. It's exactly what they'll need if they plan to carry water with them. He handed it back to Hatsum. Till yours is finished, anyway. Hatsum flopped back down in front of the TV and turned on one of the sitcoms they'd been working their way through for the 5th time. Izuku let the show fill the air as he typed, and Hatsum pulled out a sketchbook to work on more babies. He liked this a lot. Just them enjoying each other's company. They worked together in a way Izuku hadn't expected when he first met her. But Hatsum's loud and exuberant nature was able to distract Izuku's mind. She was like the music he always played, helping him focus. It was also nice that she'd sit through his rambling about heroes and quirks without getting bored or annoyed. He was just as eager to hear about her new babies. When they met the first day of classes their first year, Hatsum had sat through his nervous chatter with unwavering attention till he was finished and then curiously asked about his quirk. He'd expected her to leave with a poor excuse after he told her the truth, but her eyes had just widened and asked if he could read her mind. She was the first person he'd opened up to about the full range of his quirk. Instead of running, she told him his quirk was amazing and in a way became his support item. Izuku looked over at her, laughing at the TV with a half-eaten slice of pizza in her hand, and felt his chest warm. She wasn't always the most emotionally intelligent, but she was quick at realizing there was a problem and removing him from stressful situations. He couldn't ask for a better friend. Izuku shot up from his desk the next morning to his blaring alarm. He winced at his sore joints and stiff neck as he shut off his alarm flashing on his phone. Hatsum groaned behind him, having fallen asleep in the beanbag chair. At some point, the popcorn bowl in her lap had toppled to the ground, sending the leftover unpopped kernels across his floor. You're cleaning that up, he groaned. She waved him off as she stood and popped her joints till her body went lax with a tired sigh. He watched her leave and then stripped off his clothes and pulled on a fresh uniform. As he was straightening his tie in the mirror, Hatsum returned, also in clean clothes but also holding something in her hands. She set it down on the ground and hit a button. The machine buzzed across the floor, skinning up the mess from the night before. Aren't my babies amazing? She gushed. Izuku snorted. You have something for everything, don't you? You can never be caught off guard, Midoriya. You can buy those, you know? She looked hurt by the notion. Mine is so much better. He has twice the suction power of any on the market and digital mapping. Just look. Izuku watched as the little robot paused in front of the bed's leg before moving around it slowly, not missing a spot before disappearing under his bed. Yes, baby, get those dust bunnies. Hatsum cheered, proud tears in the corner of her eyes. Izuku rolled his eyes, shutting his closet door, and picked up his backpack. Move it, Hatsum, we've got class. My babies. They'll be fine. Hatsum spun on him, her eyes narrow with scrutiny. You forgot that Mr. Aizawa asked us to help with his class, didn't you? I need some of my babies. I'll be right back. Izuku drew a blank as she ran off to her room. He vaguely remembered Hatsum mentioning a team-up with the Hero Corps students. When did you tell me about this? He asked Hatsum when she returned with a large bag on her back. She quirked an unamused brow. Don't tell me you spaced out again. I get that your final project has been keeping you busy, but this is just sad. She tooted her tongue in disappointment. You were there when Mr. Aizawa asked us. Izuku felt his cheeks flush. Right? He grumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. I remember now. He'd been focused on adding notes to the students' design SBM since when Mr. Aizawa had stopped them in the halls to ask that they help in a training exercise. They hurried out of the dorms and over to campus, separating after homeroom to attend classes. While Hatsum's classes revolved primarily around tech and support item designs, Izuku's classes dealt with the construction of costumes and working with hero agencies. Being a hero was never in his cards, he realized that in middle school, but that didn't mean he couldn't still follow his dreams. Part of why heroes are as good as they are is because of support items. He could make heroes great. He could make costumes that would be remembered. He had the power to craft a hero's image. But still, he couldn't help but wonder where life would have taken him if he'd held onto that childhood dream. If he'd fought harder to learn how to control his quirk instead of ignoring it for so many years. Attending UA had been a turning point for his relationship with his quirk. Still, the progress was slow-moving, especially since he vowed to only use it during combat training or dire situations. It felt too invasive otherwise, even if he couldn't block it out all the time. Some people's thoughts were just too loud. He never actively read people's minds. Some of the teachers expressed interest in him transferring to the hero course. Hatsum too on many occasions. He'd told Hatsum the extent of his quirk's powers, everything it could do, but he got the impression she didn't fully understand. His teachers knew even less, only that he could hear other people's thoughts. Not a lie, just not the whole truth. Izuku pushed open the door to his next class. Sewing and design. He liked this class. The sewing machines were wonderful background noise. He slid into his desk next to the window and pulled out his sketchbook. Even though he already submitted the costume he'd been working on last night, he still wanted to play around with the design to something he felt better fit the student's quirk. Midoriya, I need your help. Two purple hands slammed on his desk. Sure, what do you need? His classmate, Kiyo, waved her hand bringing over the costume she was working on. Izuku stood to get a better look. The fabric levitated in the air thanks to her telekinetic quirk. She requested that we add more black accents to the bodysuit portion, but I'm struggling to figure out the best design. Kiyo picked up her tablet and opened a digital sketch pad. These are some of my designs, but I'm also not sure what material would be best. She has an acid quirk. Mina Ishido from Class 2A, right? Kiyo scowled at him. How do you do that? Izuku shrugged a bit bashful. Anyway, can't you just use whatever her bodysuit is made of? We don't make it anymore. We don't have something new? Izuku took the tablet from her hands and opened the fabric database. No, we do. I'm just not sure what would be best. She wants stretch, but those are the weakest to acid. She pointed to the 3 fabrics she had saved. All about the same score in acid resistance, but varying shades of black, one looking closer to dark gray. But, since it's weaker material, I need to think about where to place it on the costume. Izuku flipped back to the sketchbook where Kiyo had drawn a couple of designs. He looked between them and the costume floating a foot away. This new material is still stronger than the one hers is currently made of, he muttered. We should probably put in a note for her to consider requesting an updated costume altogether. Oh, good idea, Kyo said, stepping away to type the note into her computer. I like the one with the black sleeves. Yeah. She leaned on his shoulder to look at the sketch and then squinted at the costume. Should I do the legs too and go for a leotard look? Izuku took the pencil and colored in the legs black. You think that'd be removing too much of the original fabric? Kyo pressed her lips into a thin line. I could take the leg fabric and fashion them into leg warmers to go over her boots. That's a great idea. And it works with her theme. Izuku drew in the leg warmers and nodded. Yeah, I think that looks great. Sweet. Thanks, Midoriya, Kyo said, snatching the costume from the air and the tablet from his hands. Izuku sat back at his desk. With his final submitted, he had nothing to do but relax. Something he'd rather do at home, but the sewing room wasn't so bad. Sometimes it was loud enough he could get by without turning to music to drown out external noise. Given that it was the last day for final projects to be submitted, there was plenty of white noise. He focused on sketching out designs for waterquarks. There would be more in the future after all. Midoriya, Hatsum is asking for you, Kyo said, poking him with the end of her pencil. Hatsum grabbed his arm, barely giving him time to grab his bag before dragging him out of the room. We gotta get there before the heroes, she ordered, pulling him into a jog. Hatsum, slow down. The gym is right next door. There was a wild spark in her eyes that filled him with dread. We're playing the villains. I feel like you're way too excited about that. She skidded to a stop outside of the training gym, tugging him close by the tie. Show em what your quirk can do. But... She pulled him closer, their foreheads pressed together. You don't want revenge? She grinned. Even a little bit? Izuku gulped but had to admit it was tempting. Class 2A had a reputation after all. It'd be nice to knock them down a few pegs. We're the villains? But it also went deeper than that. We're the villains and Mr. Aizawa said to give them hell. Right? Because they'll be entering their 3rd year. Almost fully fledged heroes. Still, he doubted Mr. Aizawa worded it that way. I'm gonna regret this. Great. Hatsum dragged him by the tie into the gym. He pulled it from her grip and straightened it as they approached the 2 teachers talking at the entrance of the training course. A small-scale city. Mr. Aizawa and All Might greeted them. Thank you for helping us today, All Might said, giving Hatsum a leery look. Don't mind her, she's rabid, Izuku apologized, shoving his overly excited friend away. What do you need us to do? Mr. Aizawa smirked, never a good sign. We're going to have you 2 playing villains. You'll have a couple of fake hostages to guard in one of these buildings. The objective for the heroes is to save the hostages and civilians while the bombs placed around the city go off. Hostages and bombs? Izuku questioned, trying to figure out what their backstory as villains was. Aizawa nodded. The bombs are just deployed to distract the heroes from the hostages you've taken. Oh, so they're gonna have to choose between the bombs and saving people? Precisely, Aizawa nodded. This assessment is on their teamwork and strategy. Izuku felt his heart race in his chest, thundering against his ribs. Working with heroes was always so thrilling. Usually, he was just taking the opportunity to spar with them after school. Even in their combat class they didn't interact with heroes. This would be a great opportunity. One more thing, Aizawa said, getting their attention. These students will be licensed heroes in a year. Don't underestimate them. Don't hold back either. You want us to use our quirks? Izuku asked. He hated how nervous he sounded, but he'd never used 100% of his quirk in a fight. For fear of giving the true range of his abilities away. From his peripheral, he saw Hatsum glance at him, probably wondering the same thing as him. Would he get overwhelmed? One way to find out. If you don't, you'll be doing a disservice to them, All Might said. Use everything you've got. Hatsum elbowed him with a determined smile. He mirrored it, grasping her hand. We'll be the best villains. Perfect, All Might said, clasping his hands in front of him. I'll take you 2 to the hostages, while Eraserhead gets the class ready. Just as they turned a corner and headed down an alley, they heard the gym doors open and chatter fill the air. It faded though as they kept walking. That should do it, Hatsum grinned. Give him hell, babies. Izuku rolled his eyes with a fond smile. Their hostages turned out to be Midnight and Cementos. Why are you two the hostages? Wouldn't it make more sense if we were? Hatsum paused her tinkering to also hear the answer. Midnight smiled. They've fought us before several times. It'll be good for them to fight quirks they're not familiar with. We're also here to evaluate them. That made sense, but Izuku was still filled with unease, torn on what to do. Reveal the full range of his quirk or continue as he had been. If he could control it anyway. He had countless notebooks filled with breakdowns of quirks and how they were used. Izuku had a good idea of how his was used, how dangerous it could be, and the consequences that came with it, that being the main reason he didn't use the full power of his quirk. Villains were so twisted and mentally broken. Everything turned out fine. The villains stopped fighting and turned themselves in, to the heroes and police's surprise, but Izuku was left with the aftermath. He couldn't handle that every day. He sighed, rolling his shoulders to release the building tension. Hatsum offered him his metal staff. Only about 6 inches long before he pressed a button that extended it to 6 feet. He spun it around, working through a few moves. All right, decoy bombs and bubei traps are in place. Hatsum said into the walkie-talkie to Mr. Aizawa. I'll give you 1 minute to get into position and then the buzzer will sound. Roger that. Hatsum clipped the walkie-talkie back onto her belt and motioned Izuku to follow. Once at the top of the building, they walked to the edge of the roof and looked to the entrance of the city. The group of hero students were an indistinguishable blob by the gate. We should split up and get away from here, Izuku said. There's a girl with a quirk that can listen to sounds. They'll probably split up, one group for the bombs and another to find the hostages. Oh, smart. Izuku barely stifled a yelp when Hatsum grabbed him by the armpits and used her jetpack to shuttle him across the city. You stay on this side and try to trick them. I'll guard the hostages with my jetpack, so she won't hear me walking around. Izuku stumbled from her grasp, nodding. Yeah, that could work. We'll do that for now. If something happens, contact me. You got it, she grinned, flying back to the hostage building. The buzzer sounded, slamming another wave of anxiety through Izuku. He fumbled down the fire escape, missing rungs on the ladder more times than he'd like to admit. Deep breath, he muttered, pulling the detonation remote from his belt. The small screen lit up with a map of the city and he selected the ones closest to the hostages, planning to lead them away with more blasts. The center city ones would cause the most damage as well, making it harder for the heroes to move. A moment after he hit the red button, there was a series of booms and the telltale sound of metal crashing. Another deep breath and Izuku took off, running in the direction of more bombs and away from the hostages. He pressed the communicator in his ear. I detonated the ones closest to the hostages, he warned, skidding around a corner as he heard voices. Avoid as much movement as possible, they'll be close for a while. Got it, Hatsum whispered back. And Izuku? Yeah. There was a pause. You've been working really hard on your quirk. I want you to use my babies one day. Izuku felt his throat tighten. I'll do my best, he promised, meaning it. He took that resolve and focused on it. If Hatsum believed he could be a hero, he'd trust her, at least for today. With a new determination, Izuku pulled out the detonator, setting off a few more bombs. He ran to a random building, jumping through the glassless window. The empty building would stand as a decoy hostage hideout. He ran to the 5th floor and then into a random room. Hatsum had planned for their villain escapade unlike him and was able to prepare a few babies for the occasion, like a hologram projector, so that it looked like their hostages truly were in the empty room. Even a few easily placed bubei traps to really sell the illusion, just in case. After a minute he set off a few more bombs, tapping his foot impatiently. They sure were taking their time. He moved to the window, taking care not to be in full view. There were supposed to be civilians around the city too that the heroes would have to help. Probably tucking themselves into the rubble caused by the bombs before calling for help. We'll find the villains. Hell yeah, Bakubro. Who do you think it is this time? Midnight maybe? Izuku watched as the trio of heroes walked toward the building. He eyed them with suspicion safely from the darkness as they stopped and considered the decoy building. You sure this is the one Jiro was talking about? Shut up and search the building. You could ask nicer, you know, the one with yellow hair whined following behind the redhead. Hardening and electricity, if he remembered correctly. This wasn't going to be easy. He'd have to use the element of surprise. Shut up. I'll start from the top. Izuku ducked away from the window as Bakugo blasted up the roof. Clutching the staff, Izuku moved out of the room going across the floor. 3 wasn't so bad. He could handle that as long as acted quickly. There were footsteps and muffled voices approaching. Izuku crouched into a defensive stance, staff ready. All he needed was to see them. Who the heck are, the redhead, Kirishima, was saying. Stop, Izuku ordered. They both paused with slightly confused expressions on their faces. You searched this floor, there's nothing here. Leave the building. They about-faced and continued down the stairwell to exit the building. Izuku watched them go chatting about how Jiro must have been wrong. It'd be easier to deal with one hero, so he hurried up to the next floor. Bakugo was walking the hallway peeking into rooms as he passed muttering about slow idiots. In the small space, Bakugo wouldn't be able to use large explosions, but it wasn't ideal for Izuku either. He frowned. Maybe he could lead Bakugo up to the roof. That might work. Or he could capture Bakugo in a net. That would be funnier. He stepped out in front of Bakugo, surprising the young hero. Deku? He smirked, glancing around like it was a joke. Izuku scowled at the old nickname. Don't tell me you're the villain, he snickered. Where are the hostages? I know you've got them hidden here somewhere. Izuku shrugged with a half-smile. You'll have to get through me to find them. Don't be an idiot, Deku. Izuku ignored him. Instead, he activated his quirk and charged. He dodged Bakugo's attacks, knocking back the hero mostly with the element of surprise, but he'd take what he could get. Izuku shoved Bakugo's hand away a second before an explosion knocked Bakugo off balance. Izuku used that opening to snag the hero in a capture net. Definitely funnier. What the hell? Bakugo trashed in the netting, setting off explosions to burn it. Izuku didn't bother telling him it was fire-resistant. I'm gonna effing kill you. Heard that one before, Izuku said, waving his hand dismissively as he headed towards the stairwell. When he got outside, he finished detonating the remaining bombs and then headed back towards the real hostage building. He'd catch any heroes getting too close. He stumbled to a stop when a giant explosion went off behind him. He picked up the pace. Hatsum, what's the status? No heroes yet, she responded, voice still an eager whisper. I'll keep it that way, he promised. He stepped out into a street he heard voices coming from. A group of 6 heroes were walking towards him, but they slowed to a stop. You're not a teacher. It was Ashido, wearing the updated costume. Talk about a last-minute deadline. Observant of you, Izuku rolled his eyes, strolling closer to the heroes. His eyes shot to Todoroki. Ice was coming. Izuku dodged the attack, struggling to come up with a plan. They were too close to the hostages for comfort. Who are you? Izuku opened his mouth to answer but paused as the boy's thoughts entered his mind. Don't answer that one. He lifted his staff and went for an attack. Dodging so many attacks was easier when he knew what was coming, but he still struggled. And it was clear the heroes were getting aggravated. Aren't you a support student? Izuku nodded, surprised by the thrill he was getting. Reaching into his utility belt, he pulled out 3 capture net bombs and threw them at the closest heroes. They fell to the ground fully encased or tangled up. 3 left. Dodging tape, fire, ice, and punches wasn't any easier. Their thoughts flooded into his head. Their frustration, confusion, and actions. Stop! Izuku shouted, fully exhausted. He leaned forward on his knees, breathing, and the 3 standing heroes relaxed. What are you guys doing? Ashido shouted, struggling against the net and the acid slowly eating away at it. Everyone, stop, Izuku ordered, looking pointedly at each of them, mentally digging into their thoughts. Stay here till the buzzer sounds. It wouldn't last forever. It was simply an order. One of them was bound to ask why they were waiting, and then they'd return to their mission. Still, it would give them time. Izuku skidded to a stop as a rampaging Bakugo landed in front of him. He gulped and raised his weapon. There were still 11 students unaccounted for, and he was nearly spent. He lowered the staff using it to lean on instead. "Oh no, you're not giving up now, shithead." "Stop," Izuku ordered a moment before Bakugo blasted towards him. Pops crackled in the blonde's palms. "Hatsum, how much time is left?" 12 minutes, she answered. Izuku groaned. Bakugo was a fire type, surely he had water. "You got any water?" he asked. "Why would I?" "Please don't argue, I'm tired," Izuku whined, stepping up to Bakugo to search his belt. "Bingo!" He tipped back the small container shaped like a grenade, sighing happily at the cool water. "Thanks, Bakubro," he grinned, watching as Bakugo's eyebrow twitched. "You sure are fighting me." "I'm gonna kill you," Bakugo ground out through clenched teeth. "You do, don't you?" Izuku mused, fighting the urge to dig deeper and find out why. "Stay here, will ya?" Izuku walked back to the hostage hideout, rubbing his temples in a poor attempt to rid the growing headache. Hatsum was pouting when he entered the hostage room. "What's wrong?" "I haven't been able to use any of my babies." "I must admit, you two are doing better than expected," Cementos said, looking between them curiously. "What are your quirks?" Hatsum grinned. "I can see up to 5 kilometers. My babies are the real stars." She shot a glare at Izuku. "But somebody is hogging the spotlight." Izuku ignored her. "Mental manipulation," he answered. That was the best way he could describe it. Midnight's eyes widened. "You can mind control?" Izuku nodded, feeling himself blush. "Yes." He ignored the way Hatsum looked at him. Not quite disappointment, but something similar. An explosion rocked the building. "There, now you can test out your babies." Hatsum squealed and pulled her capture gun from her belt. Bakugo appeared in the window, almost snarling. "I'm gonna kill you." "You keep saying that." Izuku easily dodged a blast, "but it sounds to me like you're all talk." The group of 6 Izuku stopped earlier came up the stairwell. Even with so little time left on the clock, Izuku doubted they could beat 7 heroes. No doubt the rest were on the way, but they could still give them a run for their money. He looked back at Hatsum and gave her a nod before rolling out of the way. She cackled, firing her net gun at the group of heroes. The ones that avoided the capture set off the traps. Some getting stuck together with goo, others tripped up in wire and nets. "Help! Help us!" Midnight called dutifully. Izuku leaned on his staff, surveying the chaos. "Aren't you guys supposed to be 3rd years? Almost anyway." He scoffed at the group. Big Bad Tua brought to their knees. He dodged a blast from Bakugo. Left, right, then left kick. Bakugo's boot hit his chin by a hair, the thick tread scraping his skin and drawing blood. Izuku hissed as he wiped it off on the back of his sleeve. "Bakugo, get to the hostages." "No, you don't want to do that," Izuku said, catching Bakugo's attention. "You want to fight me." He didn't even have to convince the hero, not when he wanted to do something so easily. "Bakugo!" The call went ignored. "Someone get to the hostages." Izuku wasn't sure who was shouting, he was too focused on avoiding Bakugo's rampage. Even though he knew every move Bakugo was about to make, Izuku struggled to find the energy to dodge, leaving him with bruised ribs and burns. Where was that diamond buzzer? Vaguely he wondered what the teachers were thinking. Their little camera was situated up in the corner, all over the mock city too. Maybe Izuku should have cared more about the pounding migraine distorting his senses, but as his adrenaline pounded he only thought of Hatsum's words. He didn't even care when one of the missing 11 heroes crawled through the window and got to the hostages. He and Hatsum had accomplished their goal. Izuku rested against a wall, a rag Hatsum had pulled from her bag and soaked with water across his eyes while she packed up her babies. "A resounding success," she declared. Izuku gave her a weak wave to talk quieter. "Sorry," she whispered. "You were awesome. I guess those extra sparring sessions paid off." Izuku managed a grunt in reply. "Here." Hatsum slid on a pair of dark sunglasses. "These should help while we walk to the entrance." He followed her, wishing he were in bed. This was a bad idea. "No success without failure," she chimed happily. "Am I just an experiment to you?" She shrugged. "Only with the best interests in mind." Izuku narrowed his tired eyes, knowing he should be upset but not having the energy to be. The exit was just up ahead. Aizawa, All Might, Midnight, and Semitas were all talking, but they stopped when he and Hatsum got closer. Class 2A nowhere in sight. What the hell was that, kid? Mr. Aizawa asked, stepping forward. Your quirk is listed as mind reading. Yep. That is what he wrote when he signed the acceptance paperwork. His head throbbed, making him wince. Can I go to Recovery Girl? No, Aizawa said, his brows pinched, clearly furious. You've been hiding the full extent of your quirk. Izuku frowned. I've never really used it. This was a good opportunity for me, but I seriously overdid it. Hatsum patted his back comfortingly. Aizawa scowled. Fine, but this conversation isn't over. Izuku leaned back on the nurse's bed, sighing as the headache dissipated and the throbbing stopped. Recovery Girl nodded to Mr. Aizawa as she left the room. Why? Aizawa asked. It was just the exhausted teacher by his bed now. Hatsum had run off to take her babies back to Power Loader's shop. The traitor? I don't like using my quirk. Aizawa narrowed his tired eyes. Explain. Izuku looked away. Every quirk has a price, right? Well, mine's a lot to handle, so I've always avoided it. He snorted. In school I let people believe I was quirkless. Aizawa sat at the end of the cot, face unreadable. Why is it hard for you to handle? Izuku eyed the teacher wearily. I can get into people's heads and manipulate their thoughts. That's how I got those students to walk away or stop fighting. He fidgeted with the edge of the sheet on the cot. People don't like their thoughts being heard, he muttered. I don't particularly like hearing them, but some people are so loud I don't have a choice. I still don't understand. Izuku looked up, meeting Aizawa's dark eyes. I don't just hear thoughts, I experience them. Sometimes that's a lot. Aizawa sat back. I see, so that's why you avoid using it. Izuku let his eyes close. Honestly, that was the first time I've pushed myself with my quirk. He smiled wistfully. Kinda surprised myself. More than yourself, kid. He stood and looked back at Izuku. One more question, why aren't you in the hero course? A quirk like yours would be very useful in the field. Izuku frowned. Well, did I think I'm too selfish for hero work? He stood from the bed and pulled his shoes on. I've stopped a few villains before, back when I still thought I could be a hero. He trailed off, tying his laces. I don't think I could do that again, he muttered. Behind him, Aizawa sighed. Think about it. You're not the first teacher to try and convince me to transfer courses, Mr. Aizawa. Besides, this is our third year. Seems kind of pointless to transfer so late. It wouldn't be easy, but I think you could do it. Izuku stifled a groan. Why do you care so much? I'm telling you, I'm not cut out to be a hero. I don't believe that, Midoriya, neither do any of the other teachers. Aizawa stepped around the bed, his face stern, but there was concern there too. You need help with your quirk regardless. Clearly, it overwhelms you. Izuku pulled his backpack on. As tempting as it was. I like my classes. I like working with quirks. I'm not a hero, he said again. But thanks for the concern. Midoriya. He paused in the doorway. Yeah. I'll tell the other teachers that you don't want to be added to the hero course, but I can't promise anything. Izuku spun on the teacher. What are you talking about? Aizawa stared back blankly, unfazed by his anger. As I said, we're concerned with the power your quirk holds. Ultimately it will be up to Principal Nizu, but Midnight and Cementos are very concerned, especially after watching the street footage. So, I don't get a choice in this? Aizawa sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. If Principal Nizu decides that it is in your best interest to be transferred to the hero course, then no. I get that you like designing costumes, but you could still do that in university or with an internship. His brows drew together. If that is what Principal Nizu decides, I'll make sure you can continue with hero support after graduation if that's what you want. Izuku considered it. Joining the hero course always felt like a far-off dream. Learning what the entrance exam was had been the final blow. His quirk was useless against robots. He sunk in on himself, upset that a part of him wanted to say yes. Maybe it was bigger than he wanted to admit. But when will they decide? In a few days probably. Izuku nodded, accepting his fate. I didn't mean to lie to anyone, he apologized, voice small and timid. I just like to forget it exists. I won't lie, it felt good fighting like that, but villains, that they're different. He flinched when Aizawa set a hand on his shoulder. It was gone a moment later, a look of concern flashing across Aizawa's face. Go home, Midoriya. We'll talk again later. Izuku nodded, bowing quickly before hurrying out of the school. Izuku fell asleep as soon as he hit his bed. He woke at 2 in the morning, still dressed in his uniform and on top of his sheets. He groaned into his pillow before pushing himself up. After changing, he headed down the hall to Hatsume's room. She never locked her door, so he entered her dark room with no announcement. You're finally up. Hatsume sat at her desk, goggles in place, some new baby before her. Izuku sunk to the floor by her chair and rested his head on her thigh. Yeah, I really overdid it. Hatsume shrugged, turning back to her project. No progress without tests. What did Mr. Aizawa say? He wants me to transfer to the hero course. His friend stopped her tinkering, pushing the goggles up her forehead. Really? More like, he warned me I might not have a choice. There have been students who transferred in their 3rd year before, you know. Izuku craned his head to look up at her. You've researched this, haven't you? Did you know you've had a 30% increase in overstimulation-induced panic attacks this semester? She asked, voice soft. Izuku felt his face flush. I'm worried about you. You need people to help you. I have you, he said, brushing her off. Hatsume picked up the baby she was working on. My babies work best with multiple sensors. Without them, they can't figure out their environment or do what they're supposed to do. She set the project down and picked up the soldering iron. Right now, I'm your only sensor, so you're not functioning at peak performance. Izuku scowled into the darkness, hating that her analogy made sense. But I'd have to change dorms. Like that will stop me from bothering you. Izuku smiled at that. Maybe he could do this. He could try this hero thing, at the very least to prove that he couldn't be one. The day after finals was technically a make-up day for students who missed exams, which meant classes were really just time to hang out with friends before the break. That was why Izuku was rummaging through scrap metal, covered in grease, looking for spare parts. Hatsume tinkered in the corner of the lab while Power Loader worked on a support item for a student. Izuku took the bucket of metal trimmings and broken parts, throwing them into the furnace to melt. He wiped the sweat from his brow, annoyed that the other two seemed unfazed by the scorching heat. Even with the lab door open, a fan going, and his gym uniform unzipped to his waist, leaving him in a thin undershirt, the room still felt like an oven. Do you? Izuku froze, empty bucket clutched to his chest. Hatsume stepped away from her project, pushing her goggles up. Prepare for impact, she yelled, ducking beneath a table just as Bakugo burst through the open doors with an explosion. Izuku frowned at the warped doors barely hanging onto the hinges. That was really unnecessary. I'll say, Power Loader scoffed. Bakugo ignored him. Instead, he stormed up to Izuku. You lying piece of shit. Izuku winced at the force Bakugo used to pin him to the wall, knocking the air from his lungs. What the hell do you want? He wheezed out, struggling to get his lungs to work again. The hands Bakugo had balled up in Izuku's shirt tightened. Why don't you want to join the hero course? How do? Izuku winced again as Bakugo's hands began to burn. You're hurting me. Surprisingly, Bakugo dropped him and took a step back. You are quirkless and weak. What the hell happened? Izuku straightened his shirt, frowning at the singe marks. I was never quirkless. When I started school at Mizudafu, I decided to hide it. Bakugo stared at him as if he couldn't comprehend what Izuku was saying. The blonde gritted his teeth, stepping forward again. Izuku glared at Bakugo, pinned between his forearm and the wall. I don't really care why you lied, but if you don't join the hero course, I will make your life a living hell. Got it, Deku? Izuku gave a stiff nod and watched as Bakugo left the lab, still fuming. Across the room, Power Loader sneered. I don't think his attitude will ever improve. Actually, I think that was him trying to be nice. Izuku said, pushing off the wall. In his own way. Power Loader just sighed, deciding to drop the subject. On a happier note, what are you two doing for the break? Hatsum didn't miss a beat, even as Izuku stumbled. I'm going with my parents to a conference in America. That's exciting. Power Loader then turned his attention to Izuku. What about you, Midoriya? Oh, I'm staying here in Mizudafu, with my family, he answered, hoping his lie was believable. Nothing wrong with relaxing. Izuku turned back to the scrap metal. The pile was mostly sorted, but there wasn't enough time for him to melt down the rest. Hatsum, we should go get cleaned up. She groaned from her workstation. It's a free day, she complained, begrudgingly following him to the locker rooms. Why do we still have to attend classes? Paperwork, probably, Izuku muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. Hatsum scowled. Paperwork is the shackles of innovation. Izuku had half a mind to agree with her, but the threat of a paperwork-destroying baby was too great. Go shower, you stink like motor oil. A hot shower had sounded lovely, but the tender burns on his chest, courtesy of Bakugo, protested, forcing him to turn the temperature down to lukewarm. They were small, mostly just irritated, and would probably be healed in the morning. Izuku scrubbed the grease and soot from his hair till the water around his feet was clear. He pulled on his clean uniform and headed to class. Music pounded in his ears as he walked through the halls, drowning out the chatter of the other students. Ahead of him, the crowd parted, letting 3 students through. Izuku frowned when he saw who it was. Hey, you're the guy, the one with red hair said, pointing towards Izuku. I'm the guy, Izuku agreed, pulling out one earbud as he walked towards them. The other students in the hall had stopped to see the interaction. You're holding up traffic. Bakugo quirked a brow, making a show of looking around. Move, he ordered, jump-starting the other students into action. Izuku held his ground when Bakugo pushed past him, ignoring the apologies from the 2 friends. Same old Bakugo. Izuku crushed a can in his hand, tossing it to the side. It was getting late, the sky vibrant ripples of purple and orange with indigo at the edges. It would take him a half hour to get back to the dorms, but he couldn't get himself to move. Probably wouldn't make it back in time anyway. The hum of the city was nice. No one talking, no thoughts, no people PRD. It wasn't often students were allowed off campus. While Izuku enjoyed the break from classes, it always put him in a tough spot. Especially when Hatsum left town and couldn't open her window for him to sneak in. He hated that she was right. Without her he was lost. Sighing, he leaned forward, surveying the city sprawling around him. He should have snuck back into the dorms hours ago before the extra security measures were turned on. But he couldn't find it in himself to care. Wouldn't be the first time he was stuck on the streets for a few nights. The memory brought a sharp pain through his chest. Freak. For a moment he was honest with himself. He wanted to join the hero course and he didn't want to be all alone for the break. Only one of those was likely to be true. Shoving the pained feeling away, Izuku stood, picked up his trash, and got off the building. He took the walk back to the dorms slow, at times activating his quirk when he approached a sketchy person or group. The dorms of UA towered in the dark, only an emergency light on in the lobby of each building. He'd have to wait till morning and sneak in with any staff that showed up. He looked up and down the street considering. There was a park nearby, but it was getting pretty cold with the sun down. Midoriya? Izuku whipped over to the voice, skiing in a sharp breath when he saw Aizawa. Hi. What are you doing at UA this late? I could ask you the same question. As if in answer, a little girl with off-white curls peeked around Aizawa's legs, her eyes wide and curious. I live near here. He narrowed his eyes. Now explain. Just out for a walk, Izuku grumbled, shoving his hands into his pockets. Aizawa and the little girl stopped a few feet away. It's late, I'll give you a ride home. No. It's okay. Izuku waved his hands frantically and took a step back. Midoriya, I was going to save this for later, but when the staff was looking through your paperwork, we realized your home address is just a P.O. box. Izuku felt his throat tighten as he looked away, unable to hide how guilty he was. Yeah, he breathed, scratching at his chin. Must be an error. Okay, then where do you live? Eri and I can walk you home. The little girl gasped at his side, clearly excited by the idea. Izuku gaped like a fish trying to come up with a lie. Aizawa watched looking mildly amused. I will run, Izuku warned, feeling his panic make him take a step back. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. You will regret that, Midoriya. Why do you want to run away? Eri asked, reaching forward to grasp Izuku's hand. I don't. I was just joking, he swore, knowing he lost the moment her ruby-colored eyes began pouting. Aizawa smirked. Great, you can join us for dinner. I don't want to intrude, Izuku was saying till the small hand grasping his fingers tightened. He hesitantly looked down at Eri, who held the most adorable frown. You have to come to dinner, Mimi. You can call me Izuku. Zuzu. Izuku was sure his heart would give out. Yes, exactly. So, you'll come to dinner? Eri asked, bouncing on the ball of her feet. Papa's making onigiri. Izuku's stomach growled at the mention of food. The snacks from earlier hadn't been near enough. He hung his head, admitting defeat. Onigiri sounds great. He let the little girl drag him back up the street, happy to let her ramble about how she didn't like how her brother made tofu and how Mirio was finally visiting and her endless questions. Aizawa trailed behind them, looking almost fond. He'd only ever known the teacher to be scowling or fighting sleep. To see him looking so normal was unsettling. The house Eri dragged him up to was modern, part of a new development, and didn't seem to fit Aizawa at all. He didn't get long to ponder it though, as Eri threw open the front door and proudly announced, This is Zuzu, he's staying for dinner, Papa. Izuku was halfway out of his shoes when two more heads peeked into the hallway. He froze. Silence stretched as he stared at Shinso and Mike. Welcome, Mike said, pulling him into the house against Izuku's protests. Izuku was pushed into a chair at the table. He looked solely at his plate as he tried to sort through everything that happened. Hey! Izuku looked up at Shinso, who took the seat across from him. Hi! Shinso rested his cheek in his hand. You're Midoriya, right? You played the villain during the final. It felt like something was lodged in Izuku's throat. He dug his fingers into his jeans, forcing a swallow. Why yeah? How did you avoid my quirk? Well, you are pretty popular, Izuku mumbled. Plus, you wanted me to answer, so I didn't. Shinso nodded. So, you can read our minds, he mused, glancing away in thought. Only during training, I swear. The other boy quirked a brow, his purple eyes shifting back. I assumed. Same with me. Izuku relaxed, realizing that Shinso could have taken control at any moment. It's a cool quirk, must be a lot of strain though. Yeah, I really overdid it. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. The doorbell rang and Eri hopped off the stool by the stove to get the door. Mirio, a recent graduate, appeared behind her. Izuku felt so out of place in the cheerful atmosphere. They were all so clearly a family and he was intruding. He sat quietly at the table, focusing his energy on blocking out thoughts reaching out to him. Everyone was so curious or concerned about him. It wasn't something they could control, so there was no point in mentioning it. Usually, Izuku would just listen to music, but that would be rude. Suddenly the tension evaporated, and he slumped forward, jarring the plates loudly. The others were still talking, but it was absurdly quieter. He looked past Shinso, meeting Aizawa's glowing eyes and floating hair. Izuku blanched, heat rushing up to his cheeks in a wave of embarrassment. Was he really so obvious? A moment later the thoughts trickled back in. Izuku fussed with the plates till they were centered again, struggling to push them out. It was those moments he missed Hatsum the most. Shinso was frowning but didn't ask any questions. Dinner was easier and Izuku managed to get through it without Aizawa stepping in again. He was happy to sit back and listen to the conversation. Every once in a while, someone would ask him a question, or Eri would tug on his sleeve and point to something across the table. Any plans for the break? Mike asked, scooping more rice onto a plate for Eri. Izuku swallowed hard and shook his head. Not really, he rasped. Embarrassed, he took a drink of water. We don't do much. We? Aizawa questioned. Izuku pulled at the collar of his shirt. He trailed off, staring down at his empty plate to avoid their stares. It's just me. I mean, I'm almost 18, so I don't have foster parents anymore. Aizawa set his chopsticks down slowly. You're supposed to have foster parents until you're 18. Izuku shrugged. Yeah, but when UA opened the dorms, UA was made my guardian because I was living there. A heavy silence settled over the table. Something about budget cuts. The dorms opened almost 2 years ago, Shinso muttered across the table. Where have you been going during the breaks? Izuku looked down to hide his burning face. Usually, I can stay with Hatsum if she isn't traveling with her family. He trailed off again, vaguely feeling like a child being scolded. This wasn't in your paperwork, Aizawa said, his voice tense. Mike shot him a worried look. You said Hatsum was on vacation. Where were you planning to stay tonight? Izuku paled, looking away from Aizawa's intimidating stare. I was planning to stay, somewhere. Aizawa's mouth pulled back in a sneer. Somewhere? Like a hotel? Izuku cursed his voice for betraying him. You're lying. Izuku locked eyes with Aizawa, jaw set hard. Fine. I didn't know. I was trying to figure that out when you showed up. Izuku stuffed the remaining grains of rice into his mouth and set the chopsticks down. It's too cold to sleep in the park, he muttered. You've slept in a park? Mirio asked. Dude, that's so dangerous. His words said one thing, but the twinkle in his eyes and the wide grin said something else. I want to sleep in a park, Eri said, standing up in the chair on her knees. Shinso pointed an accusing chopstick at him. Look at what you've done. Eri let out an excited gasp and turned to Mirio. Tammy would do great shadow puppets. He would. Mirio nodded furiously, mirroring Eri's excited fists. No one is sleeping in a park. Aizawa interrupted, followed by several whines. Especially you, he said, pointing at Izuku. I'm really okay, Mr. Aizawa. You can't even get a hotel at 17, Shinso pointed out boredly. Just stay here. That's what they're gonna make you do anyway. But, Izuku tried to argue, but was cut off again by Shinso. Seriously, just accept defeat. They don't give up. Izuku got the impression that Shinso had personal experience. Okay, he muttered, but just until I figure something out. Aizawa rolled his eyes, standing from the table with his plate. For the break. No arguments. Izuku promptly closed his mouth, ignoring the snickers coming from the table. This will have to do for now. Until we figure out something more permanent. Aizawa took a seat on the couch with the bed mat laid out on the floor. He looked up at Izuku, through half-closed eyes, and gestured to the cushion beside him. Sit, Midoriya. Izuku did as told, pulling his legs up under him. Thanks, he started, for earlier. That's exactly why I want you to transfer. So, Principal Nizu hasn't decided yet? Aizawa sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. He said he'll make a decision soon. I know you're going to tell him about all of this, Izuku said carefully, looking down hard at the coffee table. As much as I love the support course, I know you're right. I need help. I've pushed off my quirk for so long that I don't know how to handle it. He shut his eyes, not wanting to cry. Are you saying you want to transfer, Midoriya? Izuku looked at Aizawa from the corner of his eye. I don't know if "want" is the right word, but it's what I need. Aizawa sat forward with a sigh. We'll talk more in a few days. Just try to relax for now. Izuku gave a tentative nod, watching him walk down the hall. He stood from the couch and flopped down on the floor mat, closing his eyes. Are you okay? A small voice asked. Izuku peeled open his eyes, confused about when he fell asleep. He looked over to Eri kneeling by the mat, dressed in pajamas. Izuku nodded with a stretch. Just tired. Papa said he's gonna make pancakes for breakfast. It was then that Izuku realized the room was bright with morning light. He sprang up, unable to believe he'd slept through the night. The last few days had drained him more than he'd realized. I love pancakes, he finally answered. Eri beamed, clapping her hands happily. You're staying with us, right? Izuku blushed. Yeah, I think so. For how long? Eri, Aizawa said in a warning tone. Midoriya, the bathroom is the first door on the left. Izuku gave a quick thanks, snatching up his bag from the floor before heading down the hall. The burns were healed, so he was able to enjoy steaming hot water. If he was going to be a hero, he'd need a suit. Not like he didn't have a notebook filled with designs. It still felt absurd to consider. He didn't let himself think about it further. Instead, he shut the water off and picked up a towel. Looking in the foggy mirror, Izuku's resolve crumbled. Heroes didn't have scars like the ones that marred arms and torso. Heroes weren't so weak. Heroes had to be strong to save the people around them. Izuku tried to be strong once and failed horribly. Now he had scars to remind him of how badly he'd lost that fight. He turned from the mirror and pulled on a long-sleeve shirt. When he stepped out of the bathroom, the air smelled sweet. Eri was standing at the stove with Mike ladling batter onto a skillet. Shinso and Izawa were sitting on the couch watching the morning news. Out of place. He did not belong. Zuzu, how many pancakes do you want? T2. Izuku took a deep breath to settle his anxiety. It worked a little bit. Eri frowned, waving her pink spatula thoughtfully. 6, she nodded, turning back to the batter bowl. You don't have to be so stiff, Midoriya, Shinso said from the couch. You can sit down. Izuku flushed. All right. There was something comforting about their quiet interactions. It reminded him of the way Hatsum got lost in her tinkering. The same love expressed in a different way. Pancakes on the weekend. Bows in every color of the rainbow scattered around the living room. A brush sitting on the end table. Laughter coming from the kitchen. Izuku tried to remember his parents. He'd forgotten their faces long ago, but he was sure there wasn't any laughter or pancakes on the weekend. Watching Eri flip pancakes, tongue caught in the corner of her mouth, made him smile in a painful way. He knew her story and everything she endured with Overhaul, but now she was wearing a frilly apron and dropping chocolate chips into the batter. Breakfast is ready. Izuku was beginning to think his poor heart would never get the chance to settle down. He was pretty sure his sternum was bruised from how hard it had been beating the last few days. Principal Nizu has authorized the course transfer, Aizawa said, hands tucked into his pockets. His dark eyes scanning Izuku's face, searching for something. Izuku nodded, shaking off the feeling that he was being crushed. What now? We start training tomorrow. Principal Nizu has given me authorization to use the campus facilities during break. Outside there was a squeal from Eri. The next provisional hero license course is a month away, so we'll be training for that. Only a month? Izuku murmured, wondering if that was possible. Aizawa nodded. I told you it won't be easy. You'll also be taking classes on the weekends to meet the coursework requirements during the semester. All Might will oversee your physical training, but we're still looking into options for your quirk training. Izuku nodded, lip caught between his teeth. The workload didn't bother him. If he was going to be exercising his quirk, he'd need to keep busy. But what if there is no option? For my quirk training, that is. I said we're looking through options, not that we don't have any, Aizawa clarified. He shut the door to the room they stood in. A spare room of sorts with mats and training equipment scattered around. An old computer sat in one corner covered in glittery stickers, paper with the scribbles of a child around it, and a cup of markers off to the side. More lived in space. Aizawa didn't say anything as Izuku wandered around the room. An old set of speakers half covered by poorly rolled yoga mats. A punching bag leaning against the wall. There was a hook on the ceiling a few feet away. Izuku picked up one of the wooden staffs leaning against the wall. Heavier than the one Hatsum made for him. Midoriya, Aizawa said quietly, getting the younger boy's attention. What happened to your parents? Izuku flinched, quickly putting the staff back for a small distraction. No, his heart wouldn't be getting rest anytime soon. Well, he stammered, scratching his cheek. When my quirk manifested, I made a mistake. He kept his back turned to Aizawa, not wanting to see his reaction to the truth. What do you mean, Midoriya? Izuku closed his eyes to the flash of blood that crossed his vision. He let out a shaky breath when he opened them again. It was just a red exercise band. Swallow. Hide it. I was 4, he whispered, unable to speak any louder. I was with my dad and that I didn't realize what I was doing, but I couldn't stop either. Izuku uncurled his fingers from his arms, wincing at the deep crescent-shaped indents. I drove him crazy and then he killed himself. Izuku gulped, trembling, but he couldn't stop that either. My mom couldn't handle me and his death. So she surrendered me a little while later. There was a bloated silence that followed. Even with his back turned, Izuku could feel Aizawa's stare boring into his back. No thoughts. He wasn't sure he could handle fighting those off on top of everything else. I see, Aizawa muttered, suddenly closer. That's a lot for a child. Izuku snorted, finding that an understatement. It's the kind of power a villain has, he said lowly, repeating what one of his foster moms said once. No, it's not. It's whatever you make it. Izuku finally turned to look at Aizawa, surprised to find him less than a foot away. That's why I wanted to be a hero. I thought that if I could save people, I could prove them wrong. So, why did you give up? Izuku shifted his gaze to the floor. Sometimes dreams are just dreams. The reality of using my quirk wasn't something I could do long term. He sighed, knowing that Aizawa would want a better explanation than that. When I get into people's heads, I experience their memories, the emotions they felt in those moments. My brain has trouble separating what was basically a simulation and what I've actually been through. He looked back up at Aizawa. My anxiety is already bad, but when I reach into the dark parts of a person's mind, he trailed off with a shrug. I forget that those memories aren't mine and it's more than I can handle. Aizawa's gaze softened the smallest bit. That's why you joined the support course. I've always loved analyzing quirks. At the time I thought it was the closest I could get to being an actual hero, but I really fell in love with it. Aizawa nodded, looking around the room in thought. We'll figure out how to manage your quirk, he promised. What you do after that is up to you, but I hope to at least give you the option. Izuku felt his heart clench in his chest and couldn't stop the tears that welled in his eyes. He flung himself forward, wrapping his arms around Aizawa, surprising even himself. Thank you, he muttered into Aizawa's dark shirt, relaxing when tentative hands settled on his back in a loose embrace. Thank you. Izuku walked behind Aizawa holding Eri's hand tightly. The little girl tried several times to drag him away to look at cupcakes or cereal that was definitely 100% sugar. Izuku realized that she must have seen him as an easy target because one "no" from Aizawa had her settling down with a pout. But this Star Force 5 cereal has unicorn marshmallows, she was saying, eyes wide and pleading as she held the brightly colored box out to Aizawa. Please. No. Eri stomped her foot, clutching the box to her chest. Papa would let me, she grumbled, reaching up to grab Izuku's hand. Aizawa's brow twitched. Put it back, Eri. She yelped when Shinso swooped her up into his arms. How about those little oranges you like? He swiftly took the cereal box from her hands and handed it off to Izuku to put back before she noticed. She jutted out her lower lip and gave a sour nod. Shinso gave the things he'd run off to get to Aizawa, who put them in the cart. Watching a hero pull out a shopping list and diligently check off items wasn't something Izuku thought he'd ever see. Surrounded by hero-themed cereal merch, it was easy to forget they were real people who needed to go shopping. Is there anything you want, Midoriya? Izuku snapped out of his daze and looked at Aizawa, who was frowning down at the list in his hands. No, he stammered, waving his hands dismissively. What's your favorite food? Izuku had never really thought about it. He got used to eating whatever was provided. No one had ever asked him what he wanted to eat. It felt like a lot of pressure. Was ramen too basic? No, that wasn't his favorite. I do like katsudon, I guess. When Aizawa looked down at the list thoughtfully, he quickly added, I'll eat whatever, please don't buy extra because of me. The protest went unheard. Izuku scowled at the pork cutlets sitting in the shopping cart, wishing he'd said ramen. Beside him, Shinso snickered. I told you they don't give up, he whispered. I won't doubt you again, Izuku muttered back. Sighing, he turned up his music a few notches to drown out the thrum of people thinking about their groceries. He followed the little family through the store silently, more than happy to fade into the background, smiling as Eri swung their hands back and forth. Eri ran ahead to open the door. Izuku helped carry the groceries inside, feeling again like he was imposing. He considered leaving, more like sneaking out, But it was inevitable that he'd see Aizawa in the future, hero course or not, and the threat to his life was too great. So, he stewed in his guilt while unpacking the bags, trying to figure out a way to repay the hospitality. He had no money and was only mediocre in the kitchen. He supposed he could clean, that was something he was pretty good at. Yeah, that would work. He spun around to Aizawa. I'll clean. Aizawa paused, putting away a package of noodles to look at him. That's not necessary, Midoriya. While I'm here, please let me help. I'm not really good at much else, but I'm used to cleaning. Izuku pushed. He wilted as Aizawa studied him. In the living room, the chatter between Shinso and Eri had stopped too. If I'm staying here, I want to help. Fine, Aizawa groaned, dragging a hand down his perpetually tired face. You can help Shinso with his chores. Izuku nodded determinedly, flinching when Shinso set a hand on his shoulder. The other boy quickly pulled his hand away, covering up the way his face fell with an easy smile. Come on. Izuku followed him down the hall, leaving Eri to watch cartoons in the living room and Aizawa in the kitchen. Shinso took Izuku to his bedroom, third door on the left, across the hall from Eri's, if the glittery stickers were any clue. Izuku took in the room, finding it plain but orderly. Books stacked up neatly on a shelf, a few figurines, a desk by the window, thick curtains that blocked out the light. There were random pops of color. A band poster he didn't recognize tapped up above the bookshelf, their neon aesthetic sticking out like a sore thumb in the muted neutrals. A bright pink stuffed cat sitting on his made bed, probably the work of Eri. Then there was the plant that sat on the corner of his desk near the window, lush and well cared for. You can sit if you want, Shinso said with a wave. He dropped to the floor, using his bed as a backrest. He reached up, grabbing a pillow from his bed and tossing it to Izuku. There, you can use that to sit on. Izuku caught the pillow and took a seat a few feet in front of Shinso. I like your room. Shinso looked around as if he forgot what it looked like. Oh, thanks. I don't really spend a lot of time here because of the dorms. Still, Izuku said, wringing his hands. I'm sure it's nice to have something to come back to. Shinso was silent for a moment and then said, Yeah, it is. He looked towards the window and stood to open the curtains. Bright, afternoon light spilled in, filling the room with warmth. You know, I get what you're going through, he started quietly. I was a foster kid too, until about 2 years ago. Really? Izuku asked, genuinely surprised. But you look so much like Mr. Aizawa. He felt bad when Shinso flushed bright red and quickly apologized. Did they adopt Eri too? He asked, hoping to change the subject. Yeah, around the same time, he said, turning from the window, cheeks still a little pink. I'm just trying to say, you don't have to feel guilty about being here. Izuku sunk into his shoulders, watching as Shinso sat back down. I'm curious about your quirk. How does it work? He asked, leaning forward. Mine is activated by the other person answering a question. Izuku thought for a minute. If I want to manipulate someone, I need to see them. But you can hear thoughts all the time? Yeah. Shinso hummed thoughtfully. Have you ever had someone try to communicate with you? Izuku blinked. No, he'd never considered that as a possibility, and his hands itched to write it down, but his notebook was in the other room. Let's try it. Okay. Izuku nodded, taking a deep breath. He waited, eyes locked with Shinso's. He could feel thoughts coming, but this time he didn't fight them. Like Shinso, they were muted, washing up against Izuku with an air of solicitation. Can you hear me? Izuku jumped at the clear response and gave Shinso a startled nod. The other boy narrowed his eyes curiously. Try to respond. Respond? Izuku gave it a shot, never one to back down from a challenge. He reached out with his quirk to the very edges of Shinso's mind. He'd tried placing thoughts in people's minds before, but his quirk didn't work that way. Twisting together words Shinso knew, Izuku answered with I like your poster. Shinso shook his head. That felt weird. Sorry. Izuku fiddled with his fingers, struggling to contain his excitement. But it worked. I thought it would. My quirk is like a two-way street too. Again, Izuku cursed himself for forgetting his notebook. What do you mean? If it's one person, even three, my control can't be broken without external force, he explained. But if I get too far above that, then I begin to lose control, especially if they're fighting me, and they usually are. Izuku committed that to memory until he could write it down. No wonder they transferred you to the hero course. That's an awesome quirk. Shinso blushed again. Yours is cool too, he grumbled. There's something I've been wondering. What's it like inside someone's head? Like a room, Izuku answered easily. Some people are tidy, all their thoughts in order, their actions methodical. Some people are a mess. The way they react to situations scattered like clothes on the floor, their trash not picked up. Others are somewhere in between. Some have closets bigger than their rooms to hide their fears and doubts. Izuku looked up at the ceiling wistfully. Others hide their trauma between their favorite books or hang it on their walls, no longer ashamed of it. If I dive in further, then it loses form, but that's when I can really manipulate someone. I don't really know how to describe that. Maybe like swimming in the dark? When I do that, it's mostly following a feeling till I find what I'm looking for, but I've figured out there's a pattern to the way people think and store information. Like the parts of the brain? Izuku snapped his fingers. Exactly. Making people do something is easy because it's right here, he poked his forehead, but making someone move is super hard because it's so far back. Izuku shifted his hand to point at the base of his skull. Shinsu's eyes widened. So, you could control someone if you were strong enough? The thought made Izuku uneasy. Yeah, I guess so. I've never really tried. Try your quirk on me. What? Izuku yelped. Shinso waved his hand dismissively. I just want to know if I could break it because of how my quirk works. Izuku considered it. He'd be lying if he said he didn't wonder how someone else with a mental quirk may react to him. It would be good information to know. You can't be mad at me if I know your secrets. Shinso shrugged unfazed. I have nothing to hide. If you say so, Izuku muttered, not fully convinced. You're sure about this? I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. Fine, Izuku said and reached out to Shinsu's mind further than the first time. His room was similar to real life. Muted in tone but not quite as tidy. His closet hummed with dark energy which Izuku avoided fully. He pushed a little deeper into the intangible beyond. Before him, Shinsu's face twitched. He could feel him fighting like an annoying fly. Izuku ignored him easily. Curious about the poster, Izuku searched for the story behind it. Mia. Snippets of the chorus. A happy feeling. A bright smile. Izuku pulled himself out, eyes blown wide. Kaminari. Izuku gasped. You like him? Izuku grinned. You're sure you're not Aizawa's kid? He realized his mistake a moment later when Shinsu's face turned beet red with a sneer. I mean he is cute, but I'm just surprised. Izuku yelped when he was tackled to the ground, pinned at the shoulders. I warned you. He raised his arms to protect his face and to hide his snickers. You little sheet. You tell anyone you're dead. You hear me? Yeah, but Izuku felt his body go lax, Shinso smirking above him. Oh CRP. Hey. Izuku felt the whole drop due to Aizawa glaring in the doorway. No powers at home, he warned, waiting till he got a nod from both of them before continuing. And dinner's ready. Wash up. Shinso pulled Izuku forward by his shirt. You owe me, he hissed before letting go. Izuku glared at him, smoothing out the wrinkles left behind, grumbling, I warned you. The next morning, Izuku found himself yawning outside of one of UA's training gyms. It was early, still gray outside, but Aizawa had insisted they begin training as soon as possible, which meant 5 in the morning apparently. At least Shinso was suffering with him. He looked between the two wearily, wondering if he'd also developed those dark circles. He hoped not. We'll work on your quirk later, Aizawa said. For now, we'll begin physical training. All Might will be joining us later to go over your new training schedule. Izuku nodded, making the effort to wake himself up. He took a deep breath and stretched, working out the pins and needles lingering in his muscles. All right, what's first? All Might asked that I get your baseline. Aizawa nodded toward Shinso. And we need to update yours. The other boy nodded, looking just as determined. Even though Shinso had transferred earlier, Izuku supposed they were both behind their peers. "Eri, can you bring me those ball?" Aizawa pointed towards a white bucket over by the wall. Eri, unaffected by the early hour, gave a stern salute and dragged the bucket over. Aizawa reached in and picked up a ball, tossing it to Shinso. Already knowing what to do, he stepped up to the spray-painted line and threw the ball as far as he could, and Izuku mimicked. Neither of you have physical enhancing quirks, so don't be discouraged by your peers' scores. That to say, they barely broke 150 feet. By the end of the tests, Izuku was sweating. Near him, Aizawa clicked his stopwatch as Shinso finished the last sprint and repeated the time for Eri to record on her clipboard. "You have a lot of work to do, Midoriya. It will be important to follow all of All Might's orders." Izuku gave a thumbs up, mouth too busy skiing in air to answer. A shadow crossed over his face. Shinso leaned over him, arm outstretched to help him up. Izuku took it, stumbling to his feet. "Sparing next," Aizawa ordered. Izuku relaxed, rolling his shoulders. At least that was something he was pretty good at. His quirk helped, of course, and he used it, dodging Shinso's attacks and landing shots in between. A swift kick to the ribs had the other boy sprawled on the ground. "Another point for Zuzu," Eri announced, drawing a line by Izuku's name. Shinso looked up at Aizawa from the ground. "How the heck am I supposed to beat someone who knows my moves?" "Definitely not an easy opponent," Aizawa said, helping him up. "Think about it." Shinso thought for a moment, looking Izuku up and down. At the final, Bakugo started landing hits when Midoriya got tired. Aizawa nodded. "Yes, you'd have to tire him out, move faster, or overwhelm him." Aizawa looked over at Izuku. "That's something you need to keep in mind too, Midoriya. If you get burnt out, you're no help to your teammates." Izuku nodded, scribbling the note down in his notebook. "I'll keep that in mind." "Good morning," a voice called. All Might strolled towards them, a bag hanging on his shoulder. "I brought you some lunch." "Nice to meet you, young Midoriya. Aizawa has told me much about you." Izuku shook the hero's hand, not even trying to hide his star-studded expression. He'd been so nervous during the final he'd hardly registered that it was the All Might. Him not being in his hero form didn't help. It's nice to meet you again." There was a moment of confusion before realization dawned across All Might's hollow face. Yes, I remember now. I thought you looked familiar at the final. You tried to help young Bakugo during the sludge villain attack several years ago." "I'd know that green hair anywhere," All Might grinned. "Keyword tried." Izuku nodded bashfully, rubbing the back of his head. "Yep, that's me." All Might frowned then, looking away. He shook his head. "We have a lot of work to do, young Midoriya." Izuku nodded, hands clenching into fists. "I'll work my hardest." Over the next few days, Izuku fell into a new routine. Wake up at 5, eat breakfast, 2-mile jog to UA, train with All Might or Aizawa, lunch, another run, weights, dinner, shower, bed. He thought he'd hate it, but for the first time in a while, his mind wasn't buzzing. Running was better than he ever thought it would be, and he found himself going for longer and extra runs whenever he got the chance. With music in his ears and moving by people too fast for their thoughts to reach him, it was the closest he'd felt to peace in a long time. It also gave him reason to excuse himself from his hosts. Despite what Shinso had said, even knowing that no one there had a negative reaction to him, Izuku couldn't get rid of the fear that it would change, and they'd want him to leave. To avoid becoming a nuisance, he stayed out of the house as much as he could, intruding as little as possible. Break would be over in 2 weeks. It felt like such a long time, especially when he was sleeping in the living room. Every morning he made sure to roll up the bed and place it in the corner out of the way along with his backpack, but still, he wondered what they really thought of him. Every time he brought up leaving when Hatsum returned from America with her parents, Aizawa stubbornly brushed him off, saying it was the same as he was doing now. Except it wasn't, but Izuku wouldn't explain why, because then Aizawa definitely wouldn't let him leave. Izuku slowed to a walk as he came to the gates of UA. Swiping his student ID and then scanning his fingerprints, he entered the campus, picking up his jog the rest of the way to the gym. All Might was already there setting things up. Weight training by the looks of it. "Good morning, Midoriya," the retired hero greeted. Izuku pulled out his earbuds and slipped his phone into his bag. Weights were good too. At the end of the workout, Izuku slumped against the wall chugging his water and accepting the bento from All Might that held his lunch. He frowned down at the high-protein meal wondering how much his extra meals were costing Aizawa and Mike. A new spurt of guilt soiled his appetite. Something wrong, Midoriya? All Might asked, standing a few feet away, concern creasing his forehead. Izuku rested his head against the concrete wall. I just can't understand why everyone is putting in this much effort for me. All Might frowned harder. As teachers, it's our job to look out for our students. I know, Izuku said, giving his mentor an incredulous look. But this is going way beyond that. You're right, All Might sighed, sitting down in front of him. Our jobs as teachers at UA is a little different. We're not only responsible for teaching you but guiding you into your full potential. That's what we're trying to do here, young Midoriya, help you reach your full potential. He looked away then, considering something. That day I met you, those many years ago, I said something to you that I regret. Izuku's gaze fell to his empty bento. It happens. No, it wasn't okay, Midoriya, All Might cut off. I told you, you couldn't be a hero, and then I left you on that roof. It's okay, Izuku muttered, not knowing what else to say. If he told him the truth, he couldn't do that. I realized you were right, so I applied for the support course instead and I really love it. All Might's blue eyes searched his face before giving him a tentative nod. Still, I am sorry for that. His mentor stood, taking the empty bento from Izuku. Have you finished the design for your costume? Izuku dug through his bag and pulled out the folder, handing it to All Might. It'll be done by the exam? Yes, probably a few days before actually, so you'll get to try it on. Awesome, Izuku gushed. He couldn't believe his sketch was going to become real. Just thinking about it sent a chill across his skin. All Might smiled. You can go home early today. You've been doing really well. Izuku snagged on home. He gulped and nodded, forcing down his unease. Just 2 more weeks and he'd be back in his dorm, all of this a distant memory. He stood, slinging his bag onto his shoulder, bidding All Might goodbye. He didn't go back to Aizawa's house. Instead, he went for a jog around the city, planning to spend the extra 3 hours in that blissful peace. Up hills, across bridges, down endless streets till he found himself outside of the house All Might called his home. How he wanted one, yearned for one. Maybe in the future. He pushed open the front door, greeted by Eri wrapping her arms around his legs. Daddy said you were going to be home early today, she pouted, lower lip jutted out. Izuku felt his heart stop, dread filling him. The door was still open, his shoes still on, he could. Don't even think about it, Aizawa warned. Izuku chuckled nervously. I wasn't thinking anything, he lied, clearing his throat. I decided to go on another run. He flinched when Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Why didn't the number UA has listed work? The number, right, the fake one he made up. Izuku pulled at the collar of his dry-fit shirt. I don't actually have a phone. Then what are you always listening to music on? Aizawa asked, exasperated hand tangling in his loose hair. Izuku pulled out his phone. Hatsum made me this. Call and text only work on Wi-Fi, though. He frowned down at it, realizing that he should have given the number to at least Aizawa. I wrote that number down before she made it. He rubbed the back of his head, looking down at his feet. Sorry. I picked out a movie for us to watch, Eri said accusingly. Now we can't. Izuku panicked. I'm so sorry, Eri, we can watch later tonight. Okay, she grinned, letting his legs go and running back into the living room. Number. Now, Aizawa ordered, holding his phone out to Izuku. He typed it in and handed the phone back to Aizawa. You know, you can spend more time here than just sleeping. Izuku flushed and looked away. I hate them. If you don't want to, that's fine too. You're welcome here, Midoriya. Izuku nodded. I mean it's not that I guess, what I mean is. He took a breath to steady himself. I didn't mean to be rude. Aizawa was quiet for a minute and then said, help me with dinner. Izuku toed out of his shoes and followed him into the kitchen. He let himself get lost in the methodical nature of mincing vegetables, but one thought kept bugging him. What if I don't fit into your class? Is this about Bakugo? Aizawa asked, sipping the broth from a spoon. No, I'm not really worried about him, Izuku admitted. Sure, Bakugo could be loud and obnoxious, but he knew how to handle him. They've been together for 2 full years. I've seen how they work as a team. He set down the knife, not trusting himself to cut straight. What if I don't fit in? Let me deal with that, Midoriya. You should focus on your training. Izuku went back to mincing carrots, muttering, easier said than done. Beside him, Aizawa sighed. Well, there's nothing you can do till class starts and you start working with them, so stop worrying about something you can't deal with. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek, annoyed at himself, knowing that Aizawa was right. Izuku knew he was an easy crier. It had never really bothered him, even if others considered him weak for it. But this was ridiculous. Even as he wiped furiously at his face with his sleeves, he couldn't keep up. The miscellaneous-filled spare room had been cleared out, making room for a twin-size bed. The sticker-covered computer still sat on the desk in the corner, clear of drawings and capless markers. The punching bag still rested against the wall, too, Aizawa saying something about him probably wanting it. Why are you doing this? Izuku asked through sobs. He was going back to the dorms in a few weeks. Was there really a point in clearing out the room just for him? He felt terrible. You can't sleep in a park, Midoriya, Aizawa answered bitterly. You didn't have to do this, he whimpered, pressing the palms of his hands into his eyes till he saw stars. I can't accept this. I can't repay you. Everything is too much. There were light steps, but Izuku didn't look up. Midoriya, Aizawa said gently, closer now. This room is yours. You can stay here when UA is on break. Another sob worked its way up Izuku's throat, choking him. Why? Hands gently pulled his arms from his face, and he didn't fight them. Because we want to, Midoriya. He sighed, letting go of Izuku. I had Principal Nizu make me and Mike your guardians, so if you need anything, call us. Izuku sniffed, not sure if he was hearing correctly. But. No buts, Aizawa cut off. And no paying us back either. This is your family too if you want it. Izuku in a sharp, deep breath, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. But you barely know me. If that's what you're worried about, then come home during your free time. That word again. Izuku wanted it so bad, but it was surrounded by red flags and warning signs. Not home, he decided, just a safe place to sleep. He dried the last of his tears and nodded. Okay. Another thing. Don't tell anyone about this or about Shinso. Understand? Izuku nodded. Hero work was dangerous after all. I understand. But dinner's ready. Izuku followed him out, stopping by the bathroom to wash his face. There was nothing he could do about his red, puffy eyes. Eri was bound to ask. He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. The bed? A room that was his? It still didn't feel real. When he stepped into the living room, an arm was thrown around his shoulders, guiding him to the kitchen. So, how do you like the room? Be honest. Izuku smiled up at Mike. It was hard to recognize him with his hair not standing on end and a speaker not hanging around his neck. It's nice, thank you. Let me know if you want to change the color. I'm a whiz with a paintbrush, he grinned, spinning on his foot. A snort came from the kitchen. You are not. Mike glared back at Aizawa. Ignore Shoyuta, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Izuku took a seat at the table next to Eri and across from Shinso. The same seat he took at every meal. Sort of like it was his. Izuku jogged through the UA campus, passing the gym he and All Might typically used for training, following the map Aizawa had given him that morning. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he entered the General Studies building. The halls were dark and quiet, strange without the students that usually crowded it. Izuku knocked on the door to the counselor's office. A light was on inside, the only sign that the building wasn't completely abandoned during break. A nice-looking lady opened the door, ushering him in. Hello, Midoriya, she said, welcoming him into the office. I'm Mrs. Ito. Would you like some tea? Yeah, tea would be great. Izuku took a seat in the room she led him to. A plush, comfortable chair sat in front of the desk, but there were other places to sit as well. A candle burned in the corner, filling the dim office with warm light. Surprisingly cozy. "Sorry about this," Izuku said, taking the cup of tea she offered him. "I know it's break for teachers too." "Nonsense." She waved him off, her manicured nails flying across the keyboard at her desk. "Now then, this will be a short meeting just to get to know each other. Mr. Aizawa said that you're having trouble controlling your quirk and are being transferred to the hero course. That correct?" He nodded, sipping the tea to soothe his nerves. "What do you usually do to control your quirk?" she asked, hands lacing together on the desk. "Ignore it," Izuku answered truthfully. "Drown it out of music or some other background noise." Mrs. Ito nodded, typing something into her computer. "What do you mean by it?" "Well, my quirk lets me hear other people's thoughts." Izuku looked down at his hands. Trying to keep them out is like struggling to keep a door without a lock closed while on the other side something is trying to force its way in. Mrs. Ito's fingers paused midair as a frown creased her forehead. "I see. So, you can't turn your quirk off." Izuku sunk into himself, still looking at his hands in his lap. "No, at least she didn't sound disgusted or alarmed. I just try to manage it." She hummed and the clack of the keyboard started up again. "How do you manage your quirk?" "Music mostly, or I turn on my TV. Lately, I've been running." "And if you don't have access to those?" Izuku hesitated. "I can get overwhelmed," he admitted, wringing his hands. But usually it's not a problem because people are talking during class, so..." He swallowed thickly. "It's usually not a problem," he repeated quieter, unconvincingly. Across from him, Mrs. Ito let out a gentle sigh. "Midoriya, I want to help you, but that starts with being honest with yourself. I've helped all kinds of students learn to manage their quirks. Let me help you." Izuku hesitantly looked up at her, meeting her brown eyes and warm smile. It softened something inside him. "Okay, I'll try." "Good." She smiled, but it shifted to something sad, almost remorseful. "Let's talk about when your quirk manifested. Is everything Mr. Aizawa told me accurate?" Izuku shook off the chill that crossed his body and forced a nod. "We'll start there. Do you remember it well?" "No, not really. Just bits and pieces." More clacking. "It's not uncommon for children's quirks to manifest in a traumatic way," she started slowly. "It often affects them deeply for a long time." Izuku just nodded, sipping his tea diligently. "Do you experience flashbacks, moments of panic when you think about it, or anything else concerning?" "Weiss," Izuku murmured, his knuckles white around the cup. "Sometimes I see flashes of it happening again. Nothing long or detailed." He hated how small his voice was, like he was just a scared child again. "Did you have any counseling after the event?" Her voice sounded far away, but still so kind and warm. Izuku shook his head, grasping at words. "And no, soon after my mom surrendered me, and I got moved around a lot for a couple of years afterward." "I see." More clacking, loud and solid. Mrs. Ito took a deep breath through her nose, sharp. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. The candle crackled. "Solid. Midoriya?" Izuku looked up. "Breathe, Midoriya. You're okay. Breathe." The pain in his chest faded to a dull throb. "Will it ever stop?" "With time," she said, leaning to the side to pull something from her desk. "That's what we'll work on here. Your relationship with your quirk is damaged, so for your homework." She set down a small notebook on the desk and pushed it towards him. "I want you to think about the things that trigger you and write down your reactions. Try to understand why you react that way. Write whatever you need to." Izuku picked up the notebook, considering it for a second before putting it into his bag. "Don't overwork yourself," Mrs. Ito warned. "We'll be meeting twice a week for the foreseeable future." Izuku stood, setting the empty cup on her desk and slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Thank you, Mrs. Ito." He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway when she called his name. "Be kind to yourself." Izuku nodded, not sure if he could be. He sprinted out of the building, not stopping till his lungs and legs were begging him to stop. Breathing, he sat on a park bench. Birds chirped around him. A child laughed somewhere far off. In the distance, horns honked. Slowly, his body relaxed, unwinding till he felt vaguely numb and exhausted. He was supposed to be eating lunch but couldn't find the energy to get the bento out of his bag. Groaning, he sat up and surveyed the park he ended up at. Nothing looked familiar, leaving his brows drawn in annoyance. Idiot, he grumbled to himself, head cradled in his hands. His watch also told him he only had about 30 minutes before he was supposed to be back at UA to train with Aizawa and Shinso. Damn it. Deku? A voice scoffed, making Izuku freeze. What the hell are you doing here? Izuku looked over at Bakugo standing a few feet away, also dressed in workout clothes. Just on a run, he said, picking up his bag. If he was late, Aizawa would do worse than Bakugo. Bakugo didn't say anything as Izuku passed, but his glare followed. You joined the hero course, right, nerd? Izuku paused and looked back at Bakugo. Yeah, I did. Good. Izuku quirked a brow in question. Bakugo sneered, lip curling. You're gonna get strong and then I'm gonna kick your butt. You got that, Deku? Yeah, Kaken, Izuku smiled sweetly. Looking forward to it. What the hell did you call me? If you're gonna call me Deku, I'm gonna call you Kaken. He shrugged, watching Bakugo storm forward. Izuku backstepped out of his grasp. See you when classes start. He half expected Bakugo to chase after him, but he stayed in the park glaring. Bakugo. They were friends once, or at least Izuku considered they were. Sort of. Bakugo at least tolerated him. After his mother abandoning him and then shifting between foster homes for a few years, the prospect of returning to another new school had been terrifying. What if he hurt someone again? What if he was forced out like all the other homes? Shunned? And the first day of school had been terrifying. Unable to control his quirk, the thoughts of those around him bombarded his mind, pushing him to tears in the corner of the classroom. But then Bakugo was loud and demanding. A little scary even at first. He relished in attention, making sure everyone knew he was the best. Bakugo drowned out the noise. He always said what he was thinking, so Izuku never had to worry about separating vocal conversations from the thoughts he overheard. He felt normal around Bakugo. Then they got a little older and Bakugo began pushing him away till it was full-blown bullying. But it never made sense. He always pushed harder whenever Izuku brought up wanting to be a hero. Izuku stopped outside of UA's gates, looking up at the insignia. He'd thought he'd left Bakugo in the past. Getting into UA was a dream come true even if it wasn't what he originally wanted. Seeing Bakugo in the halls, rare as it may have been, and having no interaction with him was also a dream come true. Ignored was better than hated, and, despite everything, Izuku still cared about Bakugo. His first friend, whether Bakugo liked it or not. Swiping his ID card and scanning his hand, Izuku walked up to the gym. The side door was propped open with a bucket. Inside, Shinso and Aizawa were stretching, Eri doing her best to mimic them. You're late, Aizawa said. Izuku frowned, looking down at his watch. I'm 5 minutes early. Yeah, but we're finished stretching and you just got here, Shinso pointed out, arms reaching towards his toes. Izuku's mouth screwed over to the left. But won't happen again. I'll explain what we're going to do today while you catch up, Aizawa said. While Izuku dropped to the floor, Aizawa took the clipboard from Eri. Shinso has agreed to let you use your quirk on him. Izuku looked over at the other boy, brows raised. You're sure? I don't have anything to hide. He grew pink around the ears, looking off to the side. At least not anymore. Aizawa looked suspicious but didn't ask. Today, I want to measure your quirk on a single person. We'll work up from there. He waited till the two nodded before continuing. To start, Shinso and I discussed some information before you got here. Try to figure it out. Okay. Izuku gave a determined nod and turned to Shinso, who said he was ready. He reached out, brushing up against Shinso's mind and then sinking in. The room, then further, just a little deeper. Izuku frowned, piecing together the thoughts. We're having. His eyes flew open, not even sure when he closed them. He looked up to Aizawa. We're having katsudon for dinner? Good job. Keep going. But that's not in the approved meals from All Might. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, the dark circles becoming more pronounced. I'm aware. Consider it a reward for training hard. Okay. He turned back to Shinso. It had only been a few weeks. He didn't really feel like he deserved Katsudon. He'd just do some extra workouts to make up for it. That sorted, he reached back into Shinso's mind. Eri asked if we could go home early so she can watch the new episode of Glitter Star Battle Force Galactica, Into the Beyond. You told her it'll be recorded. Eri pouted, cheeks puffed out, scuffing her shoe against the floor. After this, Shinso gets to practice. Izuku looked up to Aizawa, pretty sure there was nothing else. But it took you just under 2 minutes. Aizawa reset the stopwatch. Now, let's do a few more exercises. 2 hours later, Izuku sprawled on the ground, arm thrown over his eyes to ease his dull headache. Aizawa made them spar till he and Shinso were near exhausted, tripping over their own feet. It wasn't as bad as the final, so Izuku decided to be thankful Aizawa didn't push them further. Shinso held out a water bottle to him, which he took sitting up. Thanks. Shinso gave a grunt of acknowledgement and sat down beside him. Eri was in the corner twisting with a hula hoop she'd brought, frowning harder each time it fell to her feet. Izuku stood, ignoring his sore muscles, and pulled the hoop over his head. Like this, he said, rocking around to keep the hoop around his hips. Try it. Eri took the hula hoop back. She lit up when she managed to keep it up for a few seconds, letting out an excited gasp. I did it. You did. That was awesome. Try it again. He'd never get tired of her smile. Time to go, Aizawa said. Mike should have dinner ready. Izuku scooped up Eri, setting the squealing girl on his shoulders. Shinso carried the hula hoop. Next time I get to use my support equipment, so don't expect to win, Shinso grumbled beside him. Izuku smiled at the challenge. So confident, he teased, earning snickers from Eri. Shinso glared up at her, muttering, traitor. Izuku perched on Hatsume's windowsill watching as she unpacked her luggage and souvenirs. All Might had let him out of training an hour early, which gave him time to stop by and see his friend. As she babbled on and on about the new tech showcased at the conference, Izuku realized just how much he missed her. But there was something off. Why aren't you asking me about where I stayed? Izuku asked suspiciously. Hatsume was rarely gone during breaks, but the few times she compiled a list of safe sleeping options and usually tried to sneak money into his backpack. Both of which were true this time, but she always asked where he had stayed so she could update the list something about statistics. Every time he mentioned break, she'd shove a new sketch for a baby in his face instead. Hatsume froze in her rambling, pupils dilating as she focused on him. The silence that stretched between them was so unlike her. You needed more sensors, she finally said, rushing the words together. I know you said you would be okay, but there was a 99% probability that sneaking onto campus would not work, she added as his jaw dropped. Izuku swung his legs into her room, gaping at her. You told Aizawa? He felt a range of emotions in the short span of a few seconds. Anger, confusion, gratitude, and a weird sense of why didn't I figure this out sooner. I can't believe you. She shrugged, looking over one of her many prototype piles in her room. You'll thank me in approximately 2 days. Whatever, Izuku huffed, ignoring the sour taste in his mouth. What are you doing for the rest of break? Working on my babies, of course. But that was a dumb question. He checked his watch and let out a groan. I've got to go. Hatsume nodded, head in a different helmet. Bye. Izuku hesitated on the windowsill, looking out at the street and skyline beyond. My schedule is pretty busy, so I might not see you for a few days. She perked up, pulling the helmet off. Oh, that's okay. Text me when you're free and I'll meet you at our usual spot. Izuku nodded, smiling wide. Good luck with your babies. He waved from the alley as she shut her window. Izuku ran back to the house to pick up Eri. He'd promised to take her to the park and teach her how to fly a kite. She probably already had her shoes on, waiting by the door. He picked up the pace. Breathing, he pulled open the door and called out to her. Sure enough, he heard a chair get pushed back, and then Eri appeared in the hallway wearing her new light-up sneakers and hair in pigtails. Toshi's coming too. Great. You've got your kite, right? Yep. She nodded, holding up the one they purchased the other night as proof. Shinso ruffled her hair. We can't be gone too long. Dinner will be ready soon. Then let's go now, she said, grabbing his hand and pulling him towards the door. Izuku held it open as she dragged him out. Be back in a bit, he called into the house. A muffled, be safe, answered. The park wasn't far, which gave them about an hour to let Eri play around with the kite. It was perfect out. Warm and sunny with a good breeze. Izuku laid in the grass watching the little red kite flying high above them, dipping and spinning as the string was pulled. Shinso sat nearby picking at weeds and watching her, calling out if she strayed too far. So, what's your class like? Izuku asked, shifting to rest his head on his arm. A look of dread crossed Shinso's face. Insistent, he grumbled. Whatever you do, don't tell them you don't want to make friends. But I want friends. Then you're in for a treat. Izuku smiled. So, they're nice. Yeah, except for Bakugo, but you know that. His purple eyes shifted from where Eri was sitting in the grass next to him. What's the story with you two anyway? We knew each other most of elementary and middle school, Izuku explained. They both turned when Eri yelped, but the kite had just taken a nosedive. It fluttered back up steadily. What happened? Izuku shrugged, staring at the puffy clouds passing above them. A storm was probably coming. I'm not really sure. The older we got, the more he pushed me away. The final was the first time I'd spoken to him in a couple years, actually. Huh, Shinso said like he expected more. At least the first day will be interesting. Izuku scowled at him. Why is my misfortune your entertainment? Call me curious. Shinso stood and held out a hand to him. I will say, Bakugo is different from when I first met him. Shinso shrugged when Izuku gave him an unconvinced look. From the outside he still looked like the same a-hole, but he's not as much of an a-hole. What's an a-hole? Eri asked. The two boys panicked, lives flashing before their eyes. He said apple. Apple Eri. Izuku tried to amend. Apple. Her nose scrunched up. How can someone be an apple? Shinso let out a stiff breath. Because he's rotten. Oh, she said like it made perfect sense. Off in the distance, thunder rumbled. They made it home just as it began to sprinkle. Papa! Eri called, running into the kitchen. My kite went so high I could barely see it. Izuku took the shoes she'd thrown off and put them away. In the kitchen, Eri was in Mick's arms gushing about how Shinso taught her to make the kite do loops and how it almost crashed because she pulled too hard. He was going to sit on the couch, but Aizawa dropped a stack of papers in his hands. What is this? He dared ask. You're not getting the same hands-on training that the other students got for their provisional license test, Aizawa explained. Read over this and we'll discuss it tomorrow. Izuku nodded and took the stack to his room. Sitting down at his desk, he flipped through the first few pages. Detailed diagrams and directions for first aid. He knew most of it from his classes. Another chunk was dedicated to how to talk to a civilian during a trauma situation. Highlighters and sticky notes at the ready, Izuku started reading. He ended up just using a notebook to write his questions. He'd just gotten to the section on earthquakes and tsunamis when Shirnu told him dinner was ready. Izuku sat through the meal thinking of ways he could use his quirk in a disaster situation. Midoriya, you're muttering, Aizawa chastised. Izuku blushed. Sorry. I think you could use your quirk to make people calm down, Shinso agreed. That's what I did with my quirk. Izuku poked at his dinner with his chopsticks. It was cold and he couldn't remember when he'd stopped eating. He forced himself to finish it. There was a week left till classes. A week and a half till the exam. At least he'd get some group training. The test would probably be hard alone. He'd have to be fast about it. Midoriya? Izuku looked up, surprised to find the table empty and cleared. Aizawa stood next to him, reaching forward to pick up his empty plate. I can get it. He fumbled to pick up his dishes and scoot the chair back. Midoriya, Aizawa said again, coming to stand by him at the sink. What is it? He forced himself to take a breath and turn the faucet off. You didn't run into me by accident, did you? Aizawa sighed, leaning against the counter. Your friend Hatsum said you might be outside you. Izuku soured, wondering if Hatsum put a tracker on him. He wouldn't put it past her. I'm also worried about the exam. You worry too much, Midoriya, Aizawa said, pushing off the counter. I know saying that won't stop you, but I know you'll pass. How? Izuku asked before thinking. He took a half step back, panic seizing his throat. I just mean you sound so sure. I've taught a lot of students, Midoriya. He walked away, hands shoved in his pockets, content to let Izuku stew on that, but paused in the living room. I know a hero when I see one, he added, back still turned. Izuku looked at the ground, eyes wide and burning as Aizawa's footsteps faded down the hall. Alone, he let out a stifled gasp, the tears welling on his eyelashes threatening to fall. He pressed his sleeves to his eyes to dry them, holding them there for a moment. Rain thrashed outside his window as he sunk into bed. Lying in the darkness, he wondered what Hatsum and Aizawa saw in him that he couldn't. This hero they kept pushing him to become. They didn't understand. They couldn't because he wouldn't tell them. He wouldn't show them. But if they knew, would they stop pushing? Would Aizawa convince the faculty to let him return to the support course? His stomach twisted. No, he didn't want that. He didn't want to love the hero course, it would make the eventual disappointment easier, but here he was. Falling harder than he ever expected. So hard. It was going to hurt. Yet, that didn't stop the flutter in his heart he got every time he thought of the final, or every time he beat Shinso, or when he met another training goal, or. Izuku scowled at the rain still pouring the next morning. He considered still going for a run, but he couldn't afford to get sick so close to the first day of classes and the exam. Groaning, he shut the front door and took off his shoes. The house was dark and quiet. Mind buzzing and unsure of what to do with his 2 hours of free time, Izuku stood awkwardly in the kitchen. Something to distract him. Turning the TV on wasn't an option. He didn't want to wake anyone, and music wasn't working. He dragged a stiff hand through his green curls, letting out a tense breath. He checked his watch. 5:22 a.m. He hurried back to his bedroom and dropped to the floor. Push-ups till his muscles began to ache. Still, not enough, he curled the weights sitting by his bed. Then he went through the packet of papers Aizawa gave him, brushing up on his notes and questions, writing new ones. Finally, the rain turned to a drizzle and the sun began to peek through, but it was too late for even a short run. He also remembered he had another meeting with Mrs. Ito. Wearily he looked over at the notebook she'd given him. He'd filled the first few pages with descriptions of his panic attacks and what he thinks caused them. He even went as far as to text Hatsum for her thoughts. The red exercise band was tucked under the mattress. He felt ridiculous for hiding it away, but he couldn't bring himself to hang it back up either. Then there were the times he flinched when people touched him. He hated the looks on their faces. Izuku had also noticed that Aizawa, Shinso, and even Mike had started calling his name before touching him or coming near, especially when they were out of his direct line of sight. They didn't ask why he flinched, which Izuku guessed he should be thankful for, but it still bothered him that he couldn't stop himself. Izuku stood with a stretch. He'd be able to catch breakfast for once. Shinso was sitting at the table eating Aries cereal, poorly shaped unicorn marshmallows and all. Shinso looked between him and the rain still hitting the window, then nodded, piecing it together. Izuku opened the fridge but found nothing he could just grab and eat. Dad will be up soon. Usually, make eggs, Shinso said, shoving another spoonful of pink milk and unicorns into his mouth. Izuku furrowed his brow, closing the fridge. He never knew who Shinso was talking about when he said, Dad. At least Aries suched it up between the two. Izuku sighed, taking a seat at the table, head resting in his hand. Who knew missing a run would make you so miserable? Izuku glared at Shinso, who pointedly ignored him, scrolling on his phone. I'm just used to the routine. It also just felt weird to be present for breakfast, like he was intruding again. Over the 3 weeks he'd been staying there, Izuku hadn't once eaten breakfast with them. Such a little thing, but the first meal was important, right? And they all ate together. He was already intruding on dinner. He glared at the rain, hating it even more. Zuzu, Eri said with an excited gasp. You're here for breakfast. She ran across the room and clambered into the chair beside him. Yeah, it was raining so I couldn't go for my run, he explained, stifling a smile when Shinso hurriedly took his bowl of stolen cereal to the sink before Eri saw the thievery. Eri's eyes were wide and considering for a moment, then she looked over to the hall where footsteps sounded. This time, Dad, was Aizawa, looking exhausted as usual even though he'd just woken up. He grumbled a good morning as he went about making breakfast. Izuku accepted the plate of eggs, determined to eat quickly and go. Beside him, Eri smiled brightly. I hope it rains again tomorrow. Izuku decided he could eat a little slower. Izuku leaned forward on the park table, head cradled in his hands so that he could reach the straw to his drink with minimal effort. Hatsum sat across from him explaining a new design. He nodded along listening diligently as she told him the mechanics of it, happy to let her talk. The park was where they usually spent their breaks. It was nice and quiet, not too far from Hatsum's apartment either. How's training been going? She asked. Izuku groaned. He was exhausted. Good, but I hope it's enough. He gave her a curious look and then asked, what are my odds? 86% chance of passing the provisional licensing exam, 97% chance of making new friends of the first day, 96% chance of having a panic attack. Her voice faded out as Izuku took in the complicated math equations she'd flipped to making his eyes go cross. Okay, I get it. He let out a stiff laugh. 86%, huh? She nodded, pointed to a mess of numbers towards the top. Even if you don't use the full range of your quirk, your chances of succeeding are quite good. Based on the data I've collated from previous exams, I say you pass within the first 30 students. She snapped the notebook closed, giving him a hard look. That is taking into account that you give your best. I'll give my best, he huffed, sitting back in his chair. He'd have to leave soon to meet Aizawa at UA. I have to if I want to make any real progress with my quirk. I'll pass, he said again, making himself believe it. If you use the full range of your quirk, you're guaranteed to pass, but I don't think you're ready for that. Izuku shook his head, enjoying the sun on his face. Yeah, definitely not. Progress was being made. He didn't get headaches by the end of training anymore, and his meetings with Mrs. Ito had been helpful too. It was slow going though. He sat up and went back to sipping his drink. 10 more minutes and he'd have to leave. I'm moving dorms today, he said quietly. Hatsum looked up from her notebook. I forgot today was move-in day, she gasped, slamming her pencil down. Do you need help? No, there will be plenty, Izuku grumbled, standing to throw his drink away. He tried to convince Aizawa that he didn't need help moving. The Hero Course dorms were right next to his and he didn't have much stuff. He could get everything moved in a couple hours, but like most of his protests, Aizawa ignored him. Behind him, Hatsum started packing up. He only had a few minutes left till he absolutely had to leave. I'll see you in a couple days, he said, picking up his bag. She nodded, smile wide. I can't wait to see the hero dorms. I think they're the same as ours, Izuku muttered. He'd never considered they'd be different. One way to find out. She gave him a good push in the direction of UA before turning in the opposite direction to go home. UA wasn't far from the park, but still, he took his time getting there. The front gate was open, 2 faculty members standing guard as new students and their parents carried boxes up to the dorms. Izuku showed them his paperwork and they let him through. The mess of students and parents congregated around the first-year dorms. Only a handful of cars were parked outside the second-year dorms. The third years had moved out at the end of the semester and current students had moved their belonging halfway through the break. He and anyone else who transferred courses after the semester ended had to wait till move-in day to move their belongings. Aizawa's car was sitting in the parking lot, which meant they were probably waiting in the lobby. He really hoped they hadn't been waiting long. Izuku took in the first floor of his dorm knowing he'd never be able to sit on the couches with Hatsum at 3 in the morning again, or play board games with the other students, or bother each other late at night. Hatsum would probably find a way, and so many other things he'd taken for granted. I'm on the 4th floor, he said to Aizawa, pulling his key card from his backpack. They followed him into the elevator, Shinso pulling Eri in a wagon. She grinned up at him. Are you excited, Zuzu? He nodded. I am. And a part of him was, but then he thought back to the final and felt sick again. Hopefully, no hard feelings lingered. Izuku had never been embarrassed by his bedroom even if it wasn't as full as the other students. The TV was old, one that Hatsum had pulled out of a dumpster and fixed up for him. The other furniture besides the beanbag was school-issued, so that wasn't his either. His bookshelf was filled with notebooks from the years of analyzing quirks. Even though he did import them into an online format, he didn't have the heart to get rid of them. Besides his closet, those notebooks were the largest portion on the very small list of things he owned. His wardrobe wasn't much to look at either. All of his clothes only filled half a box. Something wrong? Izuku asked Shinso, who was looking down at said box of clothes with a frown. Shinso looked at the box a moment longer and then met Izuku's eyes. No, I guess I thought there'd be more, he explained, running a hand through his purple hair. Oh yeah. Izuku folded in the top and picked up the box, setting it down in the wagon. Eri looked at it and checked something off on her clipboard. I don't really have much. We wear uniforms all the time anyway. I guess so, Shinso muttered, sounding unconvinced. He looked like he wanted to ask something else but decided against it. We might be able to do it in one trip. See, I told you I could have done it alone. It would have taken you at least 3 trips on your own, Midoriya, Aizawa pointed out. Besides, we weren't doing anything, Eri said, frowning down at her clipboard. Izuku leaned over to look at it but couldn't make anything out of the glitter pen scribbled. Izuku stepped around her to unmake his bed. He'd washed the sheets at the new dorm, so he didn't bother folding them. Roll up his All Might poster and his figurine and that was it. The room was bare. Another wave of sentimentalism hit him. The dents in the walls from Hatsum's inventions going haywire, the pale space on the wall where his poster hung, the familiar smell slightly different now. A hand slipped into his and he looked down at Eri, a small encouraging smile on her face. Daddy's students are really nice, Zuzu. You'll love them. He squeezed her hand hoping that she was right. Still, he was fully prepared to be avoided and tolerated. He was used to it, he could deal with that. Having friends turn on him when they realized what his quirk could do was far worse. That's everything, so we can go to the new dorm, Izuku said, letting Eri's hand go. He picked up the box closest to him labeled bed and desk and waited for the others to move. Aizawa just stared at the 2 boxes, the TV and beanbag, eyes narrowed with a frown. Shinso shared a similar look. Izuku gripped the box in his hands tighter, feeling his cheeks begin to burn. The other students moving in did have a lot more things. Was he supposed to have more things? More things cost money which he didn't have. No one had ever mentioned it before, so why did they look upset? Izuku scuffed his foot on the ground wondering why they came. Eri, Aizawa said as he picked up the box filled with his clothes. You make sure this doesn't fall off, okay? She held the box steady in the wagon as Aizawa began pulling it. The 3A dorm looked the exact same as all the others. Hatsum would probably be disappointed. It was also completely empty, most of the hallways were dark except for the emergency lights. He was on the 4th floor again, at the end of the hall. Aizawa swiped a new key card, opening the door before handing it to Izuku. The room was also the exact same as his old one. He didn't expect anything different, but it still gave him a sense of comfort. At least he could make it look the exact same, and when Hatsum came over there wouldn't be a single difference. Izuku started unpacking his clothes, tucking breathes into drawers, and hanging his shirts and uniforms up in the closet. It didn't take long to get everything in place. Where is your room, Shinso? 2nd floor, he said, glancing up as he handed notebooks off to Aizawa to put on the shelf. Are these about quirks? Izuku perked up. Yes, I've been analyzing quirks since I was a kid. He thumbed through one of the notebooks about pro heroes, All Might poorly drawn on the cover. I made everything digital a long time ago, but I can't get rid of them. Shinso looked through one of the newer notebooks. Am I in here? Yep, I have notes on all the hero students. Shinso frowned, stopping on a page about a student in the B class. I don't know if I should be impressed or freaked out. He put the notebook back on the shelf. But I guess that explains how you were so prepared during the final. Izuku rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. It will be good to have someone like you on our team, he was saying as he broke down the box. Yaoyorozu is pretty good at grouping us together based on our quirks, but she can't always do that in a villain fight. Plus, with your mind reading, it will be a huge help in formulating plans. Izuku's throat went dry, a chill racing down his spine. He forced a nod. Okay, I'll do my best. The dorms are all the same, so you should know where everything is, Aizawa said suddenly. Eri and I are here pretty often, so if you need anything from home, let me know. There was that word again said so casually. Izuku forced another nod. Eri wrapped herself around his arm looking up at Aizawa. He wilted like he knew what she was going to ask. Can I tell everyone that Zuzu's my new brother? Izuku's jaw fell open and his heart checked out, sending his brain into a mess of error codes. Shinso stifled a snicker behind his hand. No, Eri, you can't tell anyone, Aizawa said, brows pinched. She pouted. But. No buts. We have to keep each other safe, he said gently, crouching down to her level. How about this, Izuku said, giving her hand a squeeze. You can tell them we're friends. Best friends, she countered. Izuku gave a show of thinking about it. We'll have to make bracelets so it's official. She lit up, bouncing on her toes. Okay. Shinso too? Beside them, Shinso grew pink in the cheeks. Yeah, sure, he mumbled. Eri bounced happily between them, smile wide and bright. Izuku looked down fondly at the green and pink braided string on his left hand as he swiped his key card to enter his new dorm. It was still early, a couple hours until first PRD, but he needed his uniform and All Might wanted to see him before classes. He kept an eye out for signs that someone was there, but it was unchanged from his last visit a few days ago. Hatsum was supposed to be there soon too to help with a favor claiming to have a baby perfect for the job. He opened his new bedroom door, leaving it cracked for Hatsum, and quickly changed into his uniform. It began to settle in that it was his first day in the hero course. All his plans for his third year in the support course reduced to memories. He'd worked so hard on it too, cultivating his love to outshine what he had to give up. Now he was getting a second chance. And it felt so wrong. There were so many people who deserved this more than him. People who wanted this with everything in them. People who didn't hesitate and who weren't scared. People who knew where they belonged. Not a hero, he reminded himself, just there to learn how to control his quirk, then he'd be back to support. It was just a small stepping stone to what he really wanted. Because he didn't want to be a hero, absolutely not, it wasn't for him. Plus, his classmates would probably hate him. They wouldn't be any different. Why wouldn't they when he'd taken control of them with no warning? Should he warn them? That would defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? But would they hate him less? Probably not. With so many amazing quirks at UA, it had never been as bad as elementary or middle school, but he'd never used his quirk against someone in a real fight either. He'd learned how to tell the difference between conversation and the things he'd heard. Careful, calculated conversation. Not a hero. Not a Midoriya. Izuku blinked, lungs burning as he essayed in air, eyes locking with Hatsum's. Breathe, she commanded, guiding him to his desk chair. Breathe. There was so much concern on her face, and he felt so bad. How could he be a hero when someone was always coming to his rescue? Aizawa was wrong. He was. Stop that, Hatsum said, holding his face tighter. He focused on the feeling of her fingers pressing into his cheeks. He reached forward, grabbing her wrists so she wouldn't pull away. You are a hero, Midoriya. He looked up wondering how she knew. But. You've been my hero since we met our first year. She smiled softly. I know you're scared, but I believe in you. You believe in me, he repeated, still trying to get his brain working. She nodded, gently pulling her hands away from his face. I do. You're gonna do great today. I'm gonna do great, he agreed, releasing her wrists. Especially with a new haircut, she grinned, waving a new contraption off. The favor he'd asked for. He took one last look at himself in the mirror and his mess of green hair soon to be tamed. He kept his eyes closed, towel wrapped around his shoulder, as Hatsum and her invention buzzed around his head, silently praying that it wouldn't look terrible. Every time he tried to peek, she'd smack his shoulder, so he was forced to wait patiently till she was done. Something he wasn't great at. He just let the buzz calm his anxious mind till she gave him the okay to look. The towel was whipped away and Hatsum chimed, "Finished." Izuku blinked at himself in the mirror, not quite recognizing himself. "It looks great," he finally breathed. "Of course it does." Hatsum scoffed, crossing her arms proudly. "It's mathematically impossible for my baby not to execute a perfect haircut." Izuku glanced at the gadget sitting beside the sink, then back to himself in the mirror. He ran his hands along the shaved sides of his head, shivering as the short hair poked into his palm. He then combed through the curls left on top, so it wasn't so perfect, and smiled heart lighter. "You're the best." Hatsum wrapped her arms around him from behind, head resting on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, arms tightening slightly. "I'll always be right beside you. Don't forget that." Izuku felt his heart jump. Eyes stinging, he nodded, not trusting his voice. "I won't," he managed, gripping her hand. She pulled away, still smiling at him in the mirror. "Now go be a hero." A hero? Izuku's heart hammered in his chest, stomach twisting so hard he thought he might actually be sick, so he focused on breathing the way Mrs. Ito taught him to. It helped a little. All Might had brought him his suit. It was everything he'd ever imagined. He felt good. Like he could actually do this. He could do this. So many people believed in him, he couldn't let fear win. He wouldn't let it. Not again. Be a hero. Be a hero. Be a hero. The new suit. The new hair. He looked the part. Now he just had to play it. "Midoriya." Aizawa called. Izuku jumped, heart racing again. Taking a deep breath, he walked out from behind a building to his new classmates. He stopped beside Aizawa, forcing himself to look up. Curious, confused expressions. He looked back down. They were whispering to each other. "This is Izuku Midoriya. You met him during your final. Today he's joining the hero course." Aizawa nodded his head towards the other students and Izuku stepped forward. Nice to meet you." Their chatter grew louder. They were probably talking to him, asking him questions. Izuku winced as a wave of thoughts and feelings hit him, their curiosity reaching out. He'd gotten used to the quiet nature of Aizawa and Shinso. "You can really read our minds?" Izuku looked up. It was Ashido, her gold eyes wide and curious, oblivious to his rising panic. He nodded, relaxing his hands at his sides. "Yeah, I can do that." "What am I thinking?" Izuku stumbled back as she leaned towards him. That you like my hair." She gasped, grabbing him by the shoulders. "What now?" He focused, blocking out the thoughts of the others watching. "Pink." "I can't say that." His hands flew to his burning face as she cackled. She turned back to the others, grinning like a cat. "Oh yeah, he's legit." "That's enough, Ishido," Aizawa said, shooing her back into line. "You too, Midoriya." Izuku scanned the two lines, finding the only spot open in the second row. He hurried over, ignoring the glare from Bakugo next to him. "For this exercise, you'll be split into two teams. Half of you will go with All Might to the training course next door," Aizawa explained. He called out the names and those students left the gym. He was sure Shinso going with them was planned. Ashido paused in the door and waved to him as she went. "Begin." Izuku spun back to look at Aizawa, but he was walking away, the other students moving towards the training course. This was normal. "Okay then." He jogged to catch up with them. "I'm Tsuyu, but you can call me Tsu," said a girl beside him. Izuku released a breath. "I'm Midoriya. Nice to meet you." He didn't recognize her, which meant she was one of the 11 unaccounted for during the final. "What's your quirk?" "Frog," she explained simply, tongue sticking out a bit like it was too big for her mouth. "Wow, that's so cool. And your costume's perfect." She blushed a bit. "Thank you. You're from the support course, right?" Izuku looked over at the new voice. He didn't recognize her either. "Yeah. They made me transfer after the final." "Made?" she gasped. "I didn't know they did that." Izuku scratched his cheek, looking away. "It's complicated. I'm Uraraka, by the way." Bakugo spun around, lip curled. Let's get this over with. It's probably some robots. Right? The others said. If it was robots, Izuku knew he wouldn't be very useful. Surely, Aizawa had something else planned. We'll split up, Bakugo was saying. Tail, for eyes, Icy Hot, Sparky and Deku. You're with me. The rest of you, search that half. Izuku watched Bakugo deal out orders, now understanding what Shinso had been talking about. This Bakugo was completely different, and the others trusted him. Izuku followed him, watching the way his back flexed beneath the black shirt. Izuku glanced down at his arms. He'd never thought of himself as weak, but Bakugo's arms were twice the size of his. Most of the guys for that matter. Hey, you really kicked butt during the final. The boy bumped playfully into his shoulder, grinning. He recognized him. Kaminari. He leaned closer, whispering, Bakugo still said. Izuku didn't doubt that. Kinda made him proud. These are the hairmen. It's hot, Kaminari said, throwing an arm around Izuku's shoulders. Izuku flushed, trying to put some distance between them. Kaminari, stop antagonizing our new classmate. Another guy said, pulling him off. I'm Tenya Ida, class rep. Izuku shook his stiff hand. He was one of the students he'd stopped on the street. Hey, losers, we've got company, Bakugo warned from a few steps ahead. Coming towards them was a guy Izuku recognized. Not you again, Bakugo groaned. Mirio grinned. Don't worry, Tamaki's here too. Better watch out, we're villains today. He disappeared into the ground. He popped out in front of Bakugo, landing a hit and dipping again before Bakugo could aim a blast. Where? Right. Izuku kicked, foot connecting with Mirio's jaw the moment he popped out of the ground, sending him to the ground. Nice, Midoriya, he said, wiping the blood from his lip. But it's gonna take more than that to stop me. The next time he flew out of the ground, Izuku mentally dug in. Mirio froze, placid smile in place. Bakugo stopped his punch halfway, stumbling through the momentum. Izuku held tight, weaving thoughts. Stay here, Izuku ordered. Another wave of thoughts. These different. Confused. He dropped to the ground as tentacles shot through where his head was. He rolled out of the way of another attack. He stood at the top of a building, looking down at them. Four Eyes, get the others, Bakugo ordered, smoke rising from his palms. Bakugo, I must insist you start using our name. Just go. Izuku pulled his staff from his belt, pressing the button to extend it. Tamaki didn't want to attack them. He wanted to go home. What did you do to Mirio? He asked, almost sounding like a whine. Get down here, squid for brains. Bakugo yelled, aiming a gauntlet at him. No. Izuku snickered, pressing the back of his hand to his mouth. He stopped though as Tamaki's thoughts filtered into his mind. There's someone else, Izuku said, inclining his head to the group. Who? Kaminari asked, glancing around nervously. Fire? You've got to be kidding me, someone grumbled behind him. A wall of ice formed, blocking off an onset of flames. Izuku stumbled back, watching as the ice glowed orange and began to melt. Endeavor, Bakugo growled, blasts popping in his hands. Surrender, Endeavor said, or the civilians we have held will die. Izuku reached forward, searching Endeavor's mind. The hostages are 3 blocks away, second building on the left, 3rd floor. Endeavor looked at him, fire growing a little taller. How did you? It doesn't matter. You won't win. How they were supposed to win against the number 1 hero, Izuku had no idea anyway. Even if he could take control of Endeavor, there was still Tamaki to worry about, and his hold on Mirio wouldn't last forever, especially if he was fighting. Just the thought of controlling so many people sent a dull throb through his head. Izuku raised his staff. He wouldn't be any good at long-range attacks, and he couldn't get close because of the flames. He might be able to use his capture nets, at least to slow him down. Izuku jumped away from an attack from Tamaki, the red tentacle slamming into the dirt. Between dodging Tamaki's attacks, Izuku made Endeavor stop moving. A simple command that was broken seconds later, but it allowed his teammates to land a couple of attacks. Each time Endeavor broke the hold, he grew more agitated. A clamshell slammed into Izuku's face, sending stars across his vision and breaking his hold on Mirio completely. He fell to the ground holding his bleeding cheek. The other half of their group arrived, joining the fight. A tentacle wrapped around his body, lifting him into the air. "Please give up," Tamaki asked, peering up from under his hood. Izuku ignored him, taking the moment instead to reach towards Endeavor and Mirio, pausing their attacks. "No," he bit out to Tamaki. He made a promise to Hatsum. He dug into Tamaki's head then. He would be the easiest. "Go home. This isn't worth it. You want to." He plucked at thoughts and emotions till Tamaki slowly lowered him to the ground, withdrew the extra appendages, and walked away quietly. Izuku drove it into his head that he very badly wanted to go home as he walked away. Izuku stumbled, his headache veering towards a migraine. Just a little longer. Staff raised, he took on Mirio, blocking his attacks against other students. "You're a tough one," he said, signature grin still in place, taking a few steps back. Izuku shrugged. "I try." Eraserhead said you might be a problem. Mirio cracked his knuckles before raising his fists again. "We should spar sometime, but right now I kinda have to beat you." Izuku winced as the voices and thoughts surrounding him grew louder. Looking forward to it. He focused on blocking Mirio's attacks. Aizawa warned him constantly about overusing his quirk. He didn't want to be a hindrance to the team. He had to do great. He had to keep standing. Kick. Another kick. Izuku stumbled back, cut on his cheek seeping fresh blood. "Keep fighting me. You've almost beat me." More punches, but Izuku landed a few of his own. So much fighting. The air dry from the fires and explosions. So many people thinking about their movements. He could do this. Just a little longer. He blinked and Mirio was floating, clawing at the air with a startled gasp. "Midoriya." Izuku was pretty sure his name was Ida. "Are you okay?" he asked, pressing a strong hand against Izuku's back to steady him. "I'm okay," Izuku said, wincing as Bakugo let out another explosion big enough to knock Endeavor off his feet. "Did anyone get to the hostages?" Uraraka nodded. "We sent Tsu and Shoji. They should get there soon." "I'll hold off Endeavor a little longer." They ducked as a shadow beast swooped over them, withering in the light of the flames. Ice and fire clashing in the midst of the fight. Izuku dug into Endeavor's mind, drawing back his attacks, ignoring the way his head throbbed. He could do this. Just a little longer. Izuku held Endeavor till the buzzer sounded. He dropped the control immediately, leaning on his knees. "Well done, students," Endeavor grumbled, hand pressed to his head. Uraraka pressed her fingers together, dropping Mirio to the ground. He stumbled, but his smile never faded. "That was awesome. You guys did great." He threw an arm around Izuku's shoulders. "You've got some serious tricks up your sleeve, Midoriya. What did you do with Tamaki?" "Well, he wanted to go home," Izuku said, feeling a little guilty. "So, I told him to go home." Mirio slapped his back hard, laughing. "I'm going to go find him." "Great job, everyone." He waved goodbye before taking off in a jog. "You all did well," Endeavor said. "Your teamwork has greatly improved since the last time we fought." He scanned the students. "Which one of you kept stopping me?" Izuku shrunk back as several people motioned to him. "This is Midoriya. He just joined us today," Ida explained. "What is your quirk, young man?" Izuku stared up at Endeavor, the #1 hero, in awe. He was even cooler up close. More intimidating too. Mental manipulation. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. Eraserhead will discuss your performance further." With that he left. Izuku followed the others back to where they started. Aizawa wasn't there, so they waited, which meant answering more questions. "Have you already moved into the dorms?" "Yes." "What floor?" "4th." Izuku rattled off answers, asking his own on occasion. His head was still pounding, but at least he could function, unlike last time. "Why didn't you transfer sooner?" Uraraka asked. Izuku looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't want to be a hero." Her face fell. "Why not?" Her voice was soft, genuinely curious. "It's just because we want something doesn't mean we can have it." He thought back to Hatsum and Aizawa. Training to be a hero was fun. He liked the sparring and the costumes and the glamour of it all. But when it came time for a real fight, that reality would settle in like it did all those years ago. But he was mostly confused, torn between what he wanted and what was realistic. "I'm not cut out to be a hero," he muttered, "not in the end." Hatsum and Aizawa would see that. Eventually, something slammed into his back, sending him face-first into the dirt. "What the hell are you talking about, Deku?" Bakugo growled. Izuku rolled over and glared up at him. Bakugo grabbed his suit, yanking him close. "You don't get to show up and then decide you don't want to do it." Izuku shoved at Bakugo's chest, but his hands held tight. "Let go of me. Midoriya, why don't you want to be a hero? Why did you transfer?" He was pretty sure that was Ida talking, but he kept his eyes locked with Bakugo's. "The teachers made me because I can't control it." Bakugo's hands started smoking. "You effing idiot!" Someone yelled at them to stop. Izuku was shoving harder at Bakugo, but his grip only tightened. Distantly he wondered where Aizawa was. Finally, Bakugo got off of him. He stopped a few feet away, back turned. Izuku rolled onto his side, wincing in pain from the headache and yelling. "It hurts, okay?" I can't handle it," he explained, staring down at the ground. "I'm sorry. If you're just here to learn how to control your quirk, fine. But if you can't be a hero," he turned to face Izuku, "you'll just get in our way." Izuku's heart jumped into his throat, cutting off airflow. When he looked at the others, they turned away looking guilty, but they didn't counter Bakugo either. He knew Bakugo was right, that giving anything less than 100% wouldn't be fair to the others, but last time 100% had nearly killed him. Even if he was stronger now and training with his quirk, he couldn't manage at full power. "Midoriya?" He met a pair of different colored eyes. "Todoroki. I had to learn a hard lesson with my quirk when I started at UA." Todoroki crouched down, offering Izuku a hand. "I also tried to suppress a part of my quirk," he said. "By suppressing your quirk, you're cutting off a part of yourself. I can understand why you feel you have to, but remember you control your quirk, not the other way around." Izuku considered that. "It's not that I don't." "Then what the hell is it?" Bakugo yelled, palms crackling. "Do you want to be a hero or not?" "Yes, I want to be a hero," Izuku admitted for the first time aloud. He wanted to be a hero so bad it almost hurt. Then what is the DMN problem? So many things that Izuku couldn't tell them, and they wouldn't understand. Bakugo shoved him again, tired of waiting. "Until you figure that out, stay on the sidelines." Izuku stared at the ground between his feet, hands drawing into fists. "Stay on the sidelines and figure your sheet out, but you won't get stronger there," Bakugo said, walking away. Izuku noticed Aizawa leaning against the wall watching. He bit his cheek hard because he wanted to get stronger and he wanted to be a hero, but villains. He shook his head, dispersing the thought. No, he wouldn't be alone. He wouldn't be acting recklessly to prove something to himself. It was his quirk. He controlled it. He could learn to control it completely. But more than anything, being scared forever sounded miserable. Even Hatsum would move on to bigger and better things after graduation. Then he'd be alone again, and if she was his only so-called censor, he'd be in deep trouble. If he didn't give his all at training his quirk and finding his limits, his quirk would continue to haunt him. "Kaken." He looked at Izuku over his shoulder. "What nerd?" Izuku gave a single nod. "I'll do it. I'll become a hero," he promised, repeating those words over in his head. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. "All or nothing, Deku." 100%, Izuku stood straighter, ignoring the throbbing in his cheek and sighed. He'd give 100% and only prayed it wouldn't kill him. Bakugo's lip curled back in a twisted smile. "You better to nerd." "That's enough," Aizawa finally said, pushing off the wall. "Get to your other classes, we'll discuss the exercise tomorrow. Midoriya, you stay." Izuku watched his classmates leave, some looking back apologetically. When they were alone, Aizawa fixed his tired eyes on Izuku. "I knew you were going to be a problem child," Aizawa grumbled as he approached Izuku. "But I'm proud of you," he added. Gently. "I know that was hard." Izuku's eyes began to burn immediately, And he said in a shaky breath. Go to recovery, girl, and then go to class. You did good today, Midoriya. Izuku laid starfish style on the ground staring up at the ceiling while Hatsum sat in the beanbag fast-forwarding through the intro of their show. He had a notebook in one hand and a pen in the other trying to think of ideas. I need to get stronger, he said for the 10th time. Think of any ideas yet? Izuku sat up, frowning down at his list. It was embarrassingly short. He was pretty sure one idea didn't even count as a list. Just one, but I don't know. I'm still not sure. Pitch it to me. She turned to him fully, giving him all her attention. Well, he started, chewing on the cap of the pen. I need to practice with negative emotions. Hatsum nodded. But those are the hardest for you to handle, but we don't have a controlled environment. That's the idea. He shut the notebook and set it aside. I was thinking of going to the hospital. Like the terminal wing? Maybe I could help them. Hatsum slid off the beanbag and sat in front of him. Are you sure you can handle that? That's a lot of pain. Izuku chewed on the inside of his lip, wringing his fingers. If I want any shot at being a hero, I need to learn how to deal with thoughts and emotions like that. She nodded, still looking apprehensive. But I can't go alone, he added, hoping to ease her worry. I'll need someone there to keep an eye on me, and you're the one who knows about. Hatsum nodded, not needing him to finish. When do you want to start? Tomorrow. I need to start as soon as possible. What about the exam? It's in a few days. I've been thinking about that, Izuku said, propping his head up on his fist. I'll be facing a lot of students with quirks I know nothing about. I need to get over this hurdle before that. Hatsum gave a determined smile. We'll go tomorrow. What are the parameters? She picked up his notebook, pen at the ready. Izuku scratched at his cheek, thinking, well, I guess just to see what it's like to work with those memories. It's been a long time. She hummed, writing it down. We need to make sure you don't overwork yourself either, so maybe just one patient. Yeah, that sounds good. He laid back and closed his eyes, letting the TV and pen scratching against paper fill the silence. 100%. He'd get there. He'd face his fears. He wouldn't let the past repeat itself. Then one day, he'd be a hero who could save lives. He glanced over at Hatsum knowing that everything was happening because she believed in him first. The terminally ill wing of the hospital was reserved for people nearing the end of their lives. Unable to be saved or cured, their last hope was dying with some comfort. Izuku stood in the doorway of a man in the last stages of cancer. His body was tinged yellow and sunken against his gangly bones, chest trembling with every wheezed breath. The nurse stepped away, still looking confused as to why 2 high school students would want to spend their afternoon with dying people. The air was filled with muted pain, probably dulled by the medication. Still, it filtered out of the residence in endless waves. Izuku's stomach twisted as he took a seat in the chair beside the bed. The man didn't stir from his slumber, heart monitors beeping steadily above them. Are you ready? Hatsum asked in an apprehensive whisper. Izuku nodded, throat too tight to answer. He reached forward into the man's mind, stepping into his room. The man's hospital room was completely empty. No flowers or cards or any sign that family had visited him in his last days, but his mind was another story. A traditional home with tatami mat floors and shoji doors, leaving the room bright and warm. Hoshi was the man's name. This was his space. Photographs were scattered across the room, ranging through the decades. Distinct smells that Izuku didn't quite recognize, but he pulled on them and the memories that followed. A child eating with his mother. The pure joy and love that followed a walk in the park with a young woman. Children's toys were scattered across the floor, old and worn, Hoshi's first child. A wide smile with missing teeth and crinkled eyes. Izuku pushed deeper, past the room, searching for where that pain festered. It met him like a wall, cold and hostile. He reached forward, sinking into that darkness. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like to experience such sudden pain that his chest shuddered, knocking the air from his lungs. Focus. Just a little longer. He wove through that pain, detangling its webs with the happy memories of his family. the times he felt joy and the moments he wasn't in pain. When he was young and married and carried his son on his shoulders. Slowly the pain eased, releasing its grip on Izuku's body, but he held on to it, shifting the man's memory nearly down to his core. Hoshi didn't have long. Izuku could feel the connection in the man's mind growing weak, sputtering, and almost fuzzy. If he could just give him a few days of peace, unable to recognize the pain that riddled his body and the knowing that his family wasn't there with him. If he could just make Hoshi forget. He was already so much lighter. Izuku pulled out, bringing forward more happy memories as he did. Hatsume's hand was digging into his shoulder while she crouched beside him, watching his face intently. "Well?" she asked, giving him a squeeze. Izuku opened his mouth to answer when Hoshi suddenly breathed deeply, like a weight was lifted from his chest, and his eyes opened the smallest bit. "Hiraku," he whispered, barely audible, the ghost of a smile lifting his sunken face. The heart monitor started beeping slower as Hoshi breathed once more. Izuku felt the memories he was holding at the forefront of Hoshi's mind begin to slip away like sand through his fingers. A startled gasp erupted from Izuku as he shot up from the chair, stumbling from the feeling of falling. Hatsume wrapped her arms around Izuku, asking something that he could hear. Izuku let go of the memories he held. He felt them fade into nothing as the heart monitor let out a warning signal. A moment later, the room was filled with nurses and they were ushered back to the waiting room. Izuku sunk into one of the chairs, struggling to process what he'd just experienced. The beeping down the hall had stopped and the nurses filtered out of the room with no sense of urgency. He was sure that Hoshi had died. "That was different," he finally said, voice hushed. "Dealing with physical pain, I mean. It still hurt, but not as strongly." Hatsume scribbled that down. "You must not be able to experience the physical aspect of pain as deeply." "That would make sense," she muttered, writing. "But there was something else," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I think when I took his pain, I also took whatever he was holding on to." The memories were still bright in his mind. The love, the joy, the regret when Hoshi looked at his daughter. Something had happened there that Izuku didn't investigate. He'd pulled hard on the happy memories involving the young girl and that had eased Hoshi's pain the most. "But you're okay?" He looked back over at Hatsume. "Yeah," he answered, just as surprised as she was. "I'm fine. I want to keep doing this. It will be a good gateway to the emotional side," she murmured, hand flying across the paper. Izuku let her theorize and explain as they walked back to the dorms. As UA came into view, he slowed to a stop. Hatsume made it a few feet further before realizing. "Midoriya?" "The exam is tomorrow," he said quietly, dropping his gaze to the sidewalk. "I'm going to pass. I know that. But..." He trailed off, looking back up at the school's insignia. "But then it's official. That this is my new path and I'll have a lot to prove." She smiled, grabbing his arm and pulling him. "Let's worry about that after, okay? Now, go meet your classmates." She gave him a shove towards the 3A dorms. "But I wanted to hang out with you tonight." "No can do, Power Loader needs my help on a project." She grinned, waving as she walked away. "Sensors, Midoriya, sensors." Sensors. Code for make friends. A part of him was tempted to go for a run around campus. He'd miss dinner, but then maybe he wouldn't be subjected to more questions. Hatsume would be mad though. He still hadn't found the tracker, and he'd get an earful if she found out. Accepting his fate, Izuku walked back to his dorm. When he pushed open the door, he was met with the smell of dinner and an excited gasp of, "Zuzu!" He bent down, scooping Eri up into his arms, noticing that her hair was half braided. "Eri, I didn't know you'd be here," he said, giving her a tight hug. The memory of Hoshi's little girl flashed through his mind, filling his chest with warmth. Eri wrapped her arms around his neck. "Daddy had a meeting and said I could come see you." She leaned closer, whispering, "I missed you." A chorus of giggles caught their attention. "Zuzu?" Uraraka asked. "That's adorable." Izuku blushed, shifting Eri in his arms. "Eri is really good at nicknames, huh?" She beamed up at him, holding tighter. "So, you've already met Eri?" another girl asked. Izuku couldn't remember her name though. "We're best friends," Eri said, showing them her pink and green bracelet sitting next to a purple and pink one. Izuku shifted his hand higher, showing off his matching bracelet. Uraraka clutched at her chest. That's so cute. Are you hungry? I think dinner's almost done, Izuku said as he carried her further into the common area. Eri held tight, resting against his shoulder. Aha, she mumbled. Where's Hoshi? I'm sure he's here somewhere. I'll make sure you get to see him, Izuku promised as they entered the kitchen area. Get in here, extras. Your effing food is done. Bakugo yelled, slamming down a dish on the long table. Kaken! Izuku scolded, hand covering Eri's ear. She giggled. Bakugo spun towards him, hands fisted till he saw Eri and froze. Hey man, don't curse in front of Eri. Aizawa will kill you, Kirishima laughed, clapping Bakugo on the shoulder. He turned towards Izuku with a friendly smile. Ignore him, he's just mad because Kaminari fried the toaster. How many times do I have to tell you extras to say out of my kitchen? Bakugo seethed as he set the rest of the food on the table. Izuku put Eri down but she clung to his side, hand wrapped around his fingers. Your kitchen? Bakugo's head tilted back, teeth bared. What the hell do you mean by that, Deku? It's really for the best, Uraraka said sheepishly. The rest of us are terrible in the kitchen. It is true, Ida said, hand resting across his chest solemnly. I'm afraid the first time I attempted to make dinner we had to evacuate due to smoke. Maybe it was for the best then. Eri pulled Izuku around the table to a chair fitted with a booster seat. You can sit next to me, Zuzu. I see you've made friends with little Eri, Ida smiled. I knew Eri before. We're best friends, she interjected, showing off her wrist to Ida. We have bracelets. Ida adjusted his glasses. I do see. Incredible craftsmanship. Eat before it gets cold. When Shinso showed up he took the chair on the other side of Eri. As they ate, everyone at the table introduced themselves and their quirk. Izuku committed it to memory, matching them with the descriptions in his notebook. Eri pulled on his sleeve and when he leaned down, she asked quietly, What did you call Bakugo earlier? He smiled hearing her sound out the symbols of his name. Kaken. Why? That's what I called him when we were kids. She sat back, eyes wide. You knew him when you were little? Izuku nodded. Yep, I met him when I was about your age. She gasped like she couldn't believe he could have been as young as her at some point. Is that why he calls you Deku? Were you friends? Well. Yeah, what's the story with you and Bakugo? Ashido asked, leaning forward on the table. He won't spill, so it must be good. Bakugo was looking at him now, tense and stabbing at his food. Well, Izuku started, shifting his gaze from Bakugo's to the rest of the table. We met in elementary. He trailed off, not sure what else to say. The truth was too personal and Izuku only sort of considered them friends at the time, but he was pretty sure Bakugo didn't feel the same. I just kind of followed him around, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. That's all. Across the table, Bakugo snorted. Well, there must be something else, Ashido pushed. Izuku shoved rice into his mouth. He chewed slowly, wondering if Bakugo was remembering the same thing. Their last conversation. He heard Bakugo stand and leave, sending the table into an awkward silence. Okay, so something bad, Ashido huffed. Anyway, what time are you supposed to be back from the exam? Izuku relaxed with the subject change. Mr. Aizawa said around 4. As the buzzer sounded, Izuku stumbled forward. He had until the second buzzer to form a plan. In order to pass, he needed to hit 10 people for a total of 30 targets. That was a lot of people. He'd just have to move fast. The cityscape would probably have the most people. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, ducking into a building just as the second buzzer went off. Izuku opened his quirk, scanning for any thoughts directed at him. After a minute of nothing, he stepped out and started down the street. He pressed himself against a wall as he heard voices and peeked around the corner. We need a plan, one was saying. I think we should. Izuku dug in, making them freeze. He hit their targets pinned to their clothes and took off, ignoring their cries of disbelief and the guilt that bloomed in his stomach. He had to pass, and the faster he passed the longer he would get to rest before the rescue portion of the exam. 4 down. 6 to go. He ran through the city looking for more people. Izuku jumped out of the way of an attack. "You're from UA, right?" the guy asked, smirking. He tossed one of the orange ball in his hand, looking Izuku up and down. "You're too old to be a first year. Did you fail the first test?" "Second." "No," Izuku answered stiffly, digging into his head. The boy froze, going slack-faced as Izuku hit the targets. 5 more. He moved through the city searching for easy targets and avoiding large groups. Time was ticking. There was a small group headed his way discussing a plan. More than he needed, but a lot smaller than the other groups Izuku had encountered. They'd have to do. As he reached towards their minds and dug in, he felt the dull throb begin. 7 was a lot to hold, but it wouldn't take long. He hit their targets till his turned green and an automated voice told him to go to the waiting area. He released the hold with a shuddered breath. There were only 10 other students who had passed when he entered the building. The waiting area was filled with food and drinks. He snagged a couple of protein bars and a water before finding some chairs to lay down on. Aizawa was watching somewhere. Izuku wondered what he was thinking. He also wished he had his phone so he could text Hatsum and let her know he passed the first portion. But he didn't, so he settled with watching the screens around the room as the other examinees battled it out. He gulped, watched fistfights and explosions. He'd have to face that one day. Probably soon with Class A's track record. Slowly, more people filtered into the waiting area. Izuku stayed in his chair, enjoying the hum of conversation from a distance. The second portion of the test was a rescue effort. He was torn between searching for people and helping out at the first aid station. His quirk could be useful in both areas. He watched as most of the 100 who had passed broke off in groups to search the rubble and destruction following the blasts. "Hey you, do you know first aid?" a girl asked. She'd been giving orders to what he assumed was her class. Izuku nodded. First aid was probably what he was most skilled at since he had hands-on training. "I do. I can help with my quirk too." "Perfect." She smiled and pointed to a flat area of concrete where other students were setting up supplies. "Ask for Miura, he's giving directions." With that, she ran off to recruit more people. Izuku was placed in the intake area. It started slow, groups of heroes bringing in a couple of civilians at a time. Izuku ran through a list of questions with each of them. "Does anything hurt? How many fingers do you see? Are you bleeding?" All the while, calming their thoughts, even forgetting a few times that they were actors and not really in pain at all. He shook his head each time and guided them to the area where broken bones and wounds were being dressed, or to the area people with minor injuries could wait until more help arrived. As more civilians came though, Izuku had to help stabilize bones and wrap heads in bandages. Some of the actors were incredible at faking panic attacks and shock, but Izuku calmed them down all the same. "Breathe," he'd tell them, and they'd SCK in a steady breath, relaxing on the exhale. "Don't move your arm, okay?" And they wouldn't, or, "Stay right here, you're safe now," and they'd believe it. When the command wore off, they'd blink in confusion and mutter to the other actors, trying to figure out why they'd listened. They were beginning to get crowded when more blasts went off and soldiers in black stormed the arena. The villain portion. Izuku looked around at the civilians and the other examinees beginning to show panic as the villains stormed towards them. Izuku ran up to Miura. "We need to hold them off till more heroes show up." "Right?" Miura said after a moment. He swallowed thickly. "What can you do?" Izuku looked back at the 50 or so men in black coming towards them. "I can keep some of them back for a while, but I'll need help." "Okay, here's what we'll do. I'll slow them down and you hold off any that get past." Miura gave Izuku a final nod before running towards the villains. He slammed his hands into the ground. Lush grass sprouted from the dirt, growing thick and wild, tangling around the feet of the soldiers. Izuku moved away from the first aid station, putting distance between the civilians and the villains. Up ahead, Miura was holding the villains off, creating grass and vine shields to block the goo from their guns, but the soldiers were gaining, following Gang Orcus orders. Behind him, the actors had worked up fresh tears and cries that they were going to die. If only he had enough power to calm everyone and fight. But he didn't, so he had to settle with keeping the civilians safe until more help arrived. Miura looked back at him in panic as a few soldiers made it through, waving their guns in victory. Izuku dug into their minds, ordering them to disarm the weapon and threw it out of reach. Some of their colleges shouted at them, but the three villains under his control stood silent. He repeated the action with every soldier that got through the grass till about 15 stood in a group asking each other why they were fighting teenagers. The pay wasn't even that good. Izuku winced as a sharp pain shot through his head. He didn't have much left in him. Even with the other examinees that had arrived to help, too many villains were getting close to the first aid area for him to stop. He nearly crumpled with relief when a rock wall shot up from the earth. "Hey," the boy greeted, running towards him. "My team will take it from here. We brought a bunch of civilians." He clapped Izuku on the shoulder before forming steps to climb the wall. Izuku went back to the concrete platform, glad that it was so loud and chaotic. He bent down next to a young woman, her tears making her mascara run in black rivers down her face. Commands were easy, even easier because they were acting. He reached towards her mind, coaxing her hiccups and sobs into sniffles and leveled breathing. The girl wrapping her arm let out a stiff breath, giving Izuku a thankful look. Izuku moved through the crowd of civilians, ignoring the throbbing in his head. He still had time before he reached his limit. If he just kept doing this, he'd be okay. But he had no idea how long the second portion of the exam would last. Until all the civilians were rescued or until the villains were captured. Maybe there was a time limit. Behind the rock wall, the fighting was loud. Sometimes something would hit the wall and they'd all hold their breath, but it continued to stand strong. They'd just have to trust the other students on the other side. Izuku unwrapped a roll of bandages, frowning at a bruised and twisted arm. This one was real. The actor was hurt when rubble fell during his rescue. He gently ran his fingers along the man's arm, feeling for full breaks or bone fragments. "I think it's a fracture," Izuku told him, shifting through the guy's mind to keep him calm. Izuku picked up the brace and fitted it to the broken arm. "I'm going to stabilize it, but it's important you don't move your arm. We'll get you to a hospital soon." The man nodded numbly, watching Izuku work with distant eyes. Arm wrapped and put in a sling, Izuku guided the man over to the other civilians who'd been treated. Before he left, Izuku dug into the man's mind a little deeper so that he wouldn't feel the pain so deeply. It felt like forever till the buzzer sounded. His name was on the board. He passed. But looking down at his new license with his name was what really made it set it. Izuku took a picture, sending it to Hatsum. Aizawa was there too, wearing that rare but fond smile. "You were right," Izuku hiccuped, the tears he'd been holding back now blurring his vision. He looked down at his license and they dripped off his nose. "I never thought this was possible. You did really well, Midoriya." He set a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Let's go home." Izuku wiped his eyes and followed. "Can we stop for food? I'm starving." "No. Please. No." Izuku carried Eri on his shoulders on their walk to the school. They'd swung by the house to pick her up before going back to Yue. She hummed happily, fingers twisting in his curls to hold on. "You should be thinking of a hero name. You'll need to submit one soon." Izuku looked over at Aizawa, who walked next to him. He'd never had much luck coming up with a name. Designing a costume was easy. A name was a whole other ballgame. "I like Deku," Eri said above him. "I think it sounds cool." He looked up at her as best he could. "You think so?" She nodded with a grin. "Deku to the rescue," she called, one arm raised in a heroic fist. Izuku chuckled, adjusting his grip on her knees as they entered the gate. "I think you're right. Deku it is." He looked up at the dorm building feeling proud. He got the license, now it was time to prove himself. Izuku set Eri down when they reached the steps. She ran ahead, oddly excited. "So, what's next?" Izuku asked, pausing at the door. "Well," Aizawa drawled. "We keep training your quirk. Same as we have been." Izuku hummed in thought. "What's the next goal then?" "You'll need to complete an internship before the next break, but we'll talk more about that later." Aizawa placed a hand on Izuku, guiding him into the dorm. He'd get to learn from an actual pro hero. His heart hummed with excitement and he completely missed the balloons and banner at first. When he did register them, he came to a sudden stop. A birthday? No one told him, and he didn't bring a gift. Oh no. But there was a convenience store just down the street. Congratulations, Midoriya, Uraraka said, and the others jumped out from behind furniture. Izuku stumbled back. Eri was grinning, bouncing on her toes. Uraraka reached for his hand, pulling him into the common area where drinks and snacks were set up. Why? Izuku asked, the words slipping from his mouth as his mind drew a blank. Uraraka blinked at him, slowing her speed. You passed the exam, silly. Izuku looked around at the streamers and balloons. He was pretty sure there was a cake on the table. This is too much. Don't be ridiculous. We know how hard you've been working. She let his hand go and gestured to his classmates. Besides, we wanted to give you a proper welcome. They were all so happy. He could feel it brushing up against him. I don't know what to say, he said, sinking into his shoulders. They'd done all of this for him, but he couldn't figure out why. It must have cost money. He wrung his fingers looking at all the snacks and drinks. Something was cooking in the kitchen too. Yeah man, you were great the other day. Kaminari grinned, throwing an arm around Izuku's shoulders. And now, you're officially a part of our team. Izuku still didn't know what to say, so Kaminari leaned closer. We made your favorite food too. Katsudon, right? Off to the side, Uraraka whispered, I really hope he wasn't lying. Izuku looked back at Aizawa, but he just shook his head. Don't be too loud and don't forget you have training tomorrow. Eri grabbed his hand and waved goodbye. The class muttered yes sir, and waited till the door shut before turning the music on. Izuku kept trying to linger off to the side or fade into the background, but someone always pulled him back into the conversation or another round of video games or asked his opinion on chip flavors. He glared down at his bowl of katsudon, shooting Shinso's suspicious glances. Wasn't me, he said, hands lifted in surrender. Izuku let out a frustrated huff. Then who told them? Shinso gave him a thoughtful look. Bakugo did. Wait, really? Yep. Shinso nodded. He said something along the lines of, that nerd had katsudon once and wouldn't shut up about it. Izuku flushed, knowing exactly what Bakugo was referring to. It was back when they just met and Bakugo had given what was left of his bento saying it tasted terrible, but Izuku was pretty sure he just noticed he didn't bring a lunch. Of course, it had tasted good, the best thing he'd had in a long time. He looked over at Bakugo still in the kitchen, frying up more pork loins for second servings, his usual scowl in place. Izuku ate quickly and stood to take his bowl to the sink. As he rinsed it, he glanced over his shoulder at where Bakugo stood, back still turned. Thank you, Izuku whispered so that the others wouldn't hear him but Bakugo could. He stiffened, the popping oil mixing with the music playing in the other room. Yeah, well, you don't completely SCK so. He trailed off with a shrug, flipping a pork loin. Izuku smiled. I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Kaken. Bakugo spun on him. Get the hell out of my kitchen. Okay, Izuku said, taking a few steps back. Thank you. Really? For cooking too. Bakugo crossed his arms stubbornly. Whatever. That went well, Shinso said as he sat back down, looking a bit surprised. Izuku glanced up at Bakugo, then back down at the table. I've never fully understood him, he said quietly, resting his head on his hand. Do you want to spar after classes tomorrow? Sure. Izuku looked the doors to Power Loader's shop up and down, shiny and hammered straight again. He'd wanted to stop by and say hi before his match with Shinso since he hadn't been able to when classes started. Looks nice, doesn't it? Power Loader said, walking towards him. Yeah. Won't last long though. Who did it? Power Loader laughed. Bakugo. Said he felt bad and wanted to fix them. I told him it wasn't a big deal and that Hatsum blows them off at least once a week, but he just started working on them anyway. Izuku felt himself smile. I've got some extra training, but it was good seeing you. Hey, I heard you passed. I always knew you'd do great things. Izuku smiled again, this time a little forced. Thanks. He jogged across campus to the sparring gyms, the same ones he used to spend his afternoons at over the last 2 years as a discreet way to practice his quirk. Shinso was waiting for him, capture weapon wrapped around his neck. Ready? He asked with his usual smirk. Izuku nodded silently, having fallen for that trick before. Sparring with Shinso was fun. They had a good rhythm and sometimes would casually talk while dodging each other. Izuku landed a kick to Shinso's chest, sending him to the ground. The capture weapon wrapped around his wrist, pulling Izuku off his feet. He yelped, struggling to get his footing. He pulled back as Shinso tried to drag him down. They were at a standstill. "Where did you go the other day?" Shinso asked, releasing his hold on Izuku's arm. Izuku gave him a dubious look. "It's not a trap," he huffed. "To the hospital with Hatsum," Izuku said after a moment of suspicion. Shinso adjusted the capture weapon around his neck till it lay smooth. "The school approved that? Technically it's volunteer work," he explained, tossing a water bottle to Shinso. "But it gives me the chance to practice my quirk on emotions and deep memories." Shinso pulled the water bottle away from his lips, a brow quirked. "Does Aizawa know?" "No. Not yet. I just wanted to test it out first with Hatsum." "You really trust her, don't you?" Izuku nodded, throat tight. "I don't know where I'd be without her," he admitted, but he had a pretty good idea. Shinso stepped past him, leaning against the wall. "You should tell him soon." "I know," Izuku said, water bottle crunching in his hand. He tipped his head back, looking up at the ceiling as he thought of Hoshi. It's weird, being in the mind of someone dying. "How?" Shinso asked, his eyes a little softer. "I can feel them slipping away," he almost whispered. It was fuzzy, like the connections were losing their spark. Shinso tipped back the last of his water, tossing the empty bottle into a nearby trash can. "Yeah, that's weird. We also think that I don't experience their physical pain as strongly," Izuku added. "I could use that in the field when people are injured if our theory is right." Shinsu's brow furrowed. "But emotional pain is the one you have trouble with?" Izuku leaned up against the wall beside him, crossing his arms as he thought. "It's been several years, but my mind couldn't distinguish between memories. Even now I'm feeling some of Hoshi's memories and the emotions they spark," he said, thinking back to yesterday with Eri. "With time they fade, and I remember that they aren't my memories. That's why I wanted Hatsum with me." He trailed off, muttering, "Just in case." Shinso pet his head to the side curiously. "Something happened, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried again. "A long time ago. It's why I decided not to become a hero. Honestly, I'm still really scared. I keep thinking that this is the wrong choice. But at the same time," he tipped his head back, closing his eyes, "I want this." "Then that's all that matters," Shinso said, pushing off the wall and picking up his bag. "Oh, I'm also supposed to tell you we're having dinner Saturday." Izuku watched him leave and then checked his watch. It was still early. He could go for another run or see if Hatsum wasn't busy. He gnawed on his lip as he typed out a message to her. "Figures you'd be slacking off." Izuku looked up, then glared at Bakugo standing a few feet away. "Shinso just left, Kaken," he defended, sliding his phone and the unfinished message into his backpack. He just smirked. "You want to spar or not, Deku?" "Fine." Izuku stepped into the marked area and raised his hands. He met Bakugo full force, dodging blasts and hits. Even as he was knocked to the ground and rolled out of range, he grinned. It was exhilarating. Completely different than when he sparred with Shinso. "I'm gonna kick your butt and then you won't be smiling," Bakugo taunted, hands heating up for another blast. Izuku shrugged, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You haven't yet." "Why, you little h—" The rest of his words cut off by explosions rocketing him forward. Izuku sidestepped, stumbling back when Bakugo turned a moment later, forgetting how fast Bakugo was in the air with his blasts. Bakugo's hands twisted in his shirt as he was tackled to the ground. Izuku raised his hands in surrender, struggling to breathe under Bakugo's weight. "All right, you win." He closed his eyes, feeling the dull throb begin. He felt Bakugo sit up and in a deep breath. "You're so fast, I can't keep up," he huffed, opening his eyes when Bakugo didn't answer. Bakugo didn't move off of him, he just frowned downward, concern creasing his brows, breath a bit uneven. "Kaken." Bakugo stood. Being right, I'm fast, nerd, he finally said, his voice gruff and forced. Izuku sat up and felt his shirt slide back down. He froze, panic stinging across his skin in a hot flash. If you want to spar again, let me know. You need it, Bakugo said a moment later, voice back to its usual smugness. Yeah, thanks. Izuku hurried to his feet as Bakugo walked away, picking up his backpack and leaving the gym as fast as he could. He ran back to his room, sinking down against the door when it closed. Safe but too quiet. He pulled out his phone, shoving in his earbuds and cranking up the music. Bakugo's room was next to his. Sometimes Izuku could hear him moving around. In the mornings when their alarm clocks went off at the same time and his closet door slid open. Now when Bakugo opened his door and it closed behind him, Izuku pulled out his earbuds to listen. There was a soft knock against the wall, low near the floor. Izuku looked at the wall with a frown, wondering what Bakugo was doing. God, he wanted to know, but he resisted the urge to use his quirk and find out. He wanted to know what Bakugo thought when he saw the scars. Why he was so quiet. Why he acted like he didn't see anything. He even offered to spar whenever Izuku wanted. Was that pity? Midoriya, someone yelled, knocking on his door. Izuku lurched forward with a yelp. He tentatively opened his door. It was Ashido, grinning wide, feigning innocence, a good portion of his class behind her. Izuku narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Yeah. She grinned a bit wider. We came to see your room. Huh. Don't worry, we made Shinso do it too, she said with a dismissive wave. Shinso scowled at her with a humph, looking like he'd been dragged there against his will. Izuku looked back at his room, holding the door tight. It wasn't too dirty, and they didn't look like they were going to go away. He opened the door to let him in. You have a TV? Uraraka gasped. And a beanbag chair. Ashido flopped down, sinking in with a content sigh. I love this poster. It's so cozy. Izuku pressed against the wall. So many people. So much noise. He wanted to cover his ears. He wanted them to leave, but they were being so nice. They were so close, looking through his things, his so very few things. What if they found out? What if they thought he was weird? What if they left? When would they leave? So, always soon. It would be the same. They were just being nice and then they would leave. Just like everyone before. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Then again. And again till his lungs were burning. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't. Get the hell out. Their chatter stopped as they looked towards the door. You're too effing loud. Bakugo yelled. Ashido got up with a groan. Yeah, we're going. Thanks for showing us, Midoriya. Izuku gulped. Why yeah, no problem. As their classmates filtered out, Bakugo stayed, making sure they left. Sorry, Izuku said, placing a hand on the door. You can tell them no, Bakugo said quietly. Idiots. Kaken, Izuku said as Bakugo turned to leave. Bakugo looked back at him expectantly. About earlier. You don't need to tell me, he cut off. But I kinda want you to know, Izuku fell silent at Bakugo, releasing a stiff sigh. Seriously, Deku, it's none of my business. He turned to leave again and Izuku's hands itched to reach out like when they were kids. Just to touch him. To be near him. But Izuku held himself back and instead gave a stiff nod. He let his door close, resting his forehead against its cool surface. Sheet, Izuku hissed, feeling his body shake and sunk to the floor again. He fumbled with his phone and put his earbuds in again. Not enough. He turned on the TV, sitting near the speakers. He stayed there, the music and show meddling into garbled noise, and his heart calmed. A long and slow descent from a near panic attack. He breathed deeply, feeling numb and tired. He stumbled from his room and down to the kitchen. Just as he had suspected, Bakugo was there preparing dinner. Izuku washed his hands and walked up to the cutting board where vegetables waited and pulled out a knife. Bakugo didn't stop him, glancing from the corner of his eye as Izuku started chopping. Better not it up, he muttered, shaking more peas into the skillet. Izuku smiled softly, tiredly, down at the cutting board, falling into a rhythm like he'd done with Aizawa and Mike countless times. I actually got pretty good at this, he said, picking up another carrot. Not much good anywhere else though. Beside him, Bakugo snorted. Figures you'd only be half decent at one thing. Izuku felt a laugh bubble out of him, too tired to stop it. Well, you're not wrong. Don't agree with me. And cube those. Got it, got it, Izuku huffed, scooping the finished carrots into one of the waiting bowls. Izuku walked up to his dorm with a yawn, wishing he could go to bed or at least rest. Extra training with All Might and classes on the weekends was going to be tough. He barely got any time to rest as it was. Maybe that was for the best, he thought as he pulled open the front door. He needed to change and then head over Aizawa's. Shinso said he'd meet him somewhere along the way. He yawned again as he headed back downstairs. Midoriya, you shouldn't leave. Dinner will be done soon, Yaoyorozu said as he passed her in the lounge area. The other girls sitting with her turned to look at him. I'm actually eating somewhere else tonight. I'll be back later, he explained, fighting off another yawn. Jairu leaned over the couch smirking. You got a date? No. Izuku flushed. Come on, you can tell us. Really, I'm not. I don't, Izuku said, waving his hands. I should go. He hurried out, ignoring their snickers. Just outside, Shinso was crouched by a tree, running his fingers through the fur of the stray cats that lived on campus. So, is dinner a normal thing? He asked as they started walking. Shinso shrugged. They try to at least once a month, but sometimes if school is hectic, they don't. They passed through the gate and started down the sidewalk. It was only a couple blocks. You look tired, Shinso mused after a few minutes of silence. Izuku stretched with another yawn. I think this is the most I've used my quirk in my entire life, and with the extra classes on the weekend, I'm not getting much rest. Shinso said, eyes shifting to the house as they turned the last corner. Next week should be better. Eri met them at the door, wrapping her arms around their legs in greeting. Mirio was behind her. Hey man, good to see you again, he greeted, giving Izuku a friendly punch to the shoulder. Hope you're hungry. Starving. His training with All Might ran over, and then after his meeting with Mrs. Ito he'd lost his appetite, and then he had classes. Just remembering he hadn't eaten since breakfast made his stomach growl angrily. He blushed, looking away sheepishly. Mirio just laughed. Good thing we're setting the table. Izuku sat in his usual chair next to Eri. An extra chair was pulled up between Mirio and Shinso for Tamaki. Tammy, have you ever slept in a park? Eri asked, eyes wide and leaning up on the table. Tamaki blinked down at his empty plate, his brows furrowed with confusion. No. Zuzu has. You have? Tamaki asked. I couldn't do that. Izuku shrunk back, pointedly ignoring the look Aizawa was giving him. He'd be lying if he said he hadn't napped on a park bench for a few hours while wandering the city on the days Hatsum was away. Midoriya, Mike said as he sat down, you did well on your English assessment test, so you won't need any extra lessons. That was a small relief. He was still waiting to hear back on the math and science, but he had a feeling he didn't do too well. The dinner dragged on. Izuku had to focus on blocking out sporadic thoughts. Tamaki sure thought a lot. But Izuku managed, not even a dull throb by the end, which made him smile. He stood by the sink rinsing off the dishes before handing them off to Aizawa to wash and dry. I saw that you were approved to leave campus on Wednesdays, Aizawa said, setting a plate down in the drying rack. I was going to talk to you about that actually. Izuku handed off another plate as Aizawa waited for him to explain. I'm sorry I didn't ask you first, but I wanted to test it out with Hatsum first. Izuku glanced up at him, but Aizawa just nodded, waiting for him to continue. My biggest problem is dealing with emotions and deep memories. So, I thought going to the terminal wing of the hospital would be good practice. Aizawa gave a hum of thought, setting a couple more clean plates in the rack before asking, was it? At that, Izuku frowned. It's not the exact same, but it's similar. I think I can help them and make myself stronger doing it. Aizawa was nodding again, face pensive as he methodically dried plates. I want to go with you next time. After classes. Yeah. Mizudafu Hospital. How was it different? The plates were done, so now he leaned against the counter. Izuku dried his hands on a towel, thinking. I'm working with happy memories to lessen the physical response to pain, he explained, rerouting how the brain processes and functions. It should last for a few days, then the hold wears off. Can you make it last longer? A chill rushed over Izuku's skin. Yeah, his voice wavered. I can make it last, but that takes time and I have to dig down to people's core, changing who they are fundamentally. I see, Aizawa said quietly. I did some research after you said something. He stepped away from the counter. A few years ago, there were 3 villain attacks where the villain froze in the middle of a fight and turned themselves in a few minutes later. He looked back at Izuku. That was you, wasn't it? Izuku nodded, forcing back the memories as he held himself, fingers digging into his biceps. I don't want you to do that again. I don't think it's necessary for you to win a fight. Probably not, Izuku agreed. But I still want to be prepared for the next time I'm in a real fight. Aizawa nodded, understanding. You sound confident about the hospital, so we'll try that. The hospital always held an air of foreboding. Not one wanted to be there, and their feelings flowed out, coating the walls. In the terminally ill wing, Izuku felt like he was wading through it, dragging him to a shuffle as he walked down the hall, following a nurse. She'd given them a list of patients they could see. Hatsum and Aizawa walked behind him, looking around curiously. The brightly colored walls were probably an attempt to make the patients happier, but it left the atmosphere ajar. Izuku tried again to shake the feeling off, glaring at sunflower yellow, smudge, and scuffed from where hospital beds rubbing against it. It didn't work. Izuku stepped up to the patient as the nurse left. A young woman, maybe mid-30s, but she looked just as bad as Hoshi did. He sat down, noticing the dip in the bronchiast where her left leg should have been. Hatsum and Aizawa stood a few feet away watching him. Izuku reached out, pressing into her mind. The room usually appeared to him as a bedroom, but this time he found himself in a garden. Neat rows of vegetables and areas where flowers grew wild, tangling around terraces. He walked through, enjoying the sweet smell of spring. Sometimes he wondered what his room looked like and wished he could get into his own head. Maybe it wouldn't be a room at all and something like her garden. Maybe he'd have more things, all the things he'd wanted as a child but couldn't afford. He picked up a spade, pulling on the memory of freshly turned dirt under a warm sun. Birds chirped and a hammock swayed softly in the breeze. He pulled on the memory of the garden all together hard, bringing to the forefront of her mind before diving deeper. As he entered the intangible, he felt the pain, shocking his lungs. Someone touched his shoulder. Hatsum. He pushed further, grasping that pain. A car crash that resulted in the loss of her leg and an infection that ravaged her body, caught too late. The car crash still woke her up in a panic, spending what little energy still had left every day. Maybe he couldn't take all of it, but he could make it easier. He saw the car, sitting at the wheel, laughing with someone else. It was dark, the light red. Then, suddenly, there were headlights filling the windshield and a moment later broken glass and twisted metal. Izuku knew he must have flinched again because Hatsum gripped him tighter. Not real. Not my memory. Even as he told himself that, the car rolled, and a sharp pain shot up his leg. Just forget. He wove through the memory, jumbling the connection, shifting it around till it was blurred and he couldn't pull it into focus anymore. The red light was a bird feeder. The crunch of metal, the sound of birds chirping. The skid of tires, children squealing. As he worked, pulling on memories and weaving, the tension and fear he felt relaxed. Slowly he pulled out of her mind, testing the new connections he made till he was sure she'd get a good night's rest. Her mind wasn't as bad as Hoshi's, but she was close. Probably not much longer. He rested back with a sigh, relaxing his shoulders. Hatsum crouched beside him, clearly concerned. I'm okay, he assured. He looked back at the woman still sleeping. She was in a car accident and lost her leg. I fixed it. Midoriya, we talked about this, Aizawa said tensely, taking a few steps towards him. Are you sure you're all right? Izuku stood with a nod. I feel all right, but I should probably avoid riding in a car for a few days. When Aizawa frowned, he added, I couldn't just leave her. She keeps having nightmares. Aizawa considered him for a minute before letting out a heavy sigh. Do you want to continue? Yeah, at least one more. Aizawa nodded, not looking entirely pleased, but led them to the next patient the nurse had listed anyway. This one was easier. Another cancer patient like Hoshi. Izuku pulled on the memories and rerouted the pain till the tension in the patient's mind soothed away. Even though he was proud of himself and felt like real progress had been made with his quirk, Izuku still avoided looking at the street and the cars that passed. Anxiety constricting his chest with every car that flew by. They were going way too fast. He walked furthest from the road, letting Aizawa take up most of his view. He pulled out his notebook and wrote a reminder to talk with Mrs. Ito about the aftermath. A car sped by, swerving a bit, and Izuku froze up, stumbling back. Not real. Not real. He wasn't in a car rolling. It wasn't nighttime. He screwed his eyes closed, taking in measured breaths. Tipping his head back so that he could feel the warm sun on his face, he let out a stiff exhale and opened his eyes. Midoriya? Aizawa asked, concern lacing his voice. Izuku took a few more breaths before he answered. I'm doing this to learn. My limits. What I did with that first patient is definitely a limit. He looked down, rubbing his sore and tired chest. He wanted to sleep off the stress. We're going to be taking this slow, Midoriya. I'm not thrilled at you having such side effects from using your quirk, but given its nature, I don't see how we can train you any other way, Aizawa said. Hatsum touched his arm gently, searching his face. Let's stick to 1 or 2 each visit. She looked back at Aizawa. I can update you on his progress. We'll do that for now, Aizawa agreed, stepping closer as more cars passed. Do you know how long this will last? Izuku thought about it, comparing the effects to others in the past. I think maybe a day. You're sure? He was silent for a moment, remembering how long the memories had lingered when he stopped those villains. Yes. He was sure they'd be gone by morning, his brain having sorted them out. It felt nothing like the other times. I'm sure. Izuku fell asleep listening to music to keep his mind was wandering too far. He tossed and turned fitfully, seeing headlights in his dreams and sleepily reminding himself they weren't real. It was a familiar feeling and not near as bad, which made it easier to deal with. But then there was something else that didn't quite fit. The strum of chords from a song he vaguely recognized. Muted and faraway sounding, pulling him from his sleep. Izuku blinked into the darkness of his room. It was an hour before his alarm was set to go off, the red numbers glaring back. When the strumming started up again, Izuku closed his eyes as he listened. He stumbled across his room to the wall that connected his and Bakugo's room, where it was a little louder, but still so quiet, almost timid. He rested his head back, listening silently. A chord was messed up and the song stopped only to start up again from the beginning. Izuku pulled his knees to his chest listening, the soft notes washing over him. Over and over till Izuku was half asleep against the wall. There was something so familiar about the song. Maybe something Bakugo used to play when they were kids. The notes trailed off and he heard shuffling on the other side. Izuku glanced at his alarm clock. Less than 10 minutes before it went off. He sighed and listened a little longer, picking out the familiar sounds. The closet door opening. Footsteps crossing the room. The occasional grumble. The familiarity smoothed out the lingering anxiety from the day before. A nice long run sounded wonderful. Standing, Izuku flipped on his light and stretched. He changed into his running clothes and headed downstairs. It was still dark when he stepped outside. A cool, crisp morning, perfect for a run. Izuku set out at a steady pace, watching the sunrise as he took his usual path around campus. He wondered how many mornings he'd missed Bakugo playing guitar. Wondered why he played so early. Maybe it was so no one heard him. Maybe he only did it when he was stressed, like how Izuku went for extra runs. As his run came to an end, Izuku climbed the stairs of the General Studies building. Twice a week he missed homeroom to talk with Mrs. Ito. She always had his favorite tea hot and ready when he arrived, smiling kindly as he sat down. He sighed as the heat fought off the chill in his fingers. Mr. Aizawa updated me on your new quirk training, she said, not looking away from the computer screen. What do you think of it? Izuku sipped his tea as he waited for an answer, knowing she had an opinion. She pursed her lips at something on the screen, followed by a few rapid clicks. As long as it is done in moderation, I think it's a great way for you to practice your quirk. She looked at him pointedly. What do you think of it? It was my idea. And? How is it? Izuku thought for a moment, looking around the room as he did. In moderation, he agreed. I just wish I could process emotions faster. I'm sure that's something you'll develop over time. Izuku looked at her then and considered that. Over time, he echoed. Everything was taking time. Time he didn't have. If only he'd started earlier. I don't think it will ever stop completely. But maybe if I keep doing this, I can make the process quicker. Mrs. Ito nodded, lacing her fingers together. I agree. Let's talk about what happened yesterday. It was minor in comparison to the other times, yes? Izuku set the empty mug down with a nod. Yeah, it only took a few hours. What happened? Well, the lady was in a wreck, so I made her forget about the accident. Mrs. Ito hummed in thought, fingernails clicking against the keyboard. And you feel like those memories are yours when you experience them? Instinctually, yes, Izuku said, struggling to find a way to explain it. I know they aren't mine, but sometimes they overpower that logic. She made a stressed hum, frowning at her screen. And what about one of the bad times? She paused like she didn't want to ask. How bad was it? Each time lasted about 3 days, the worst was a week, he said, pulling at his sleeves. I didn't have any friends at the time or anyone to look out for me, and I really lost myself. He hesitated for a moment before pulling up a sleeve. Even in the low light, the thin scars were painfully visible. I didn't want to do it, he said softly. It was the coping mechanism of one of the villains I stopped. I couldn't stop myself, and now. He trailed off, looking at the floor between his feet. There was a long pause before Mrs. Ito said, I see. She took in a shaky breath. That explains a lot actually, she said softly, typing on the keyboard even slower. Is this something I can share with Mr. Aizawa? Izuku stiffened. Well, I just worry about future training exercises and gym activities, she reasoned. If he knows, he could make accommodations. Are you changing into your costume in the locker rooms? Izuku gulped, sinking down a bit. I usually wear a dry-fit shirt under my uniform and leave it on under my costume. He shifted around in his seat. You can tell him. You're sure? Yeah, you're right. He should know. Bakugo knowing was enough people finding out. He sat back and looked up at the ceiling, rolling his next question around. Is there a way to stop the memories from taking over? That's the biggest issue right now. Some people think of a happy place like a good memory or someone they care about, she said, still typing. Others count or ground themselves by engaging their senses. She looked over at him, fingers paused. We'll work on that with you. Finding an anchor. Izuku looked back up at the ceiling. An anchor, he echoed, wondering what that was for him. I also want you to start rethinking your responses to triggers. Like with the exercise band, I want you to try reconnecting the color with a new memory. Izuku sat up and looked at her. That's what I do with other people's memories, he said, a bit surprised. I imagine it will be harder on yourself. It will take time. Time, he huffed. Something he didn't have a lot of. The color red. The blood covering a knife and trembling hand. Izuku shut his eyes, sking in a startled breath, barely stopping the scream that caught in his throat, coming out as a strangled, choking sound. Around him, someone was laughing, loud and boisterous. Hide it. Izuku slowly opened his eyes. The shame that filled his bones when he realized it was just Kirishima nearly making him sick. He just stepped out of the elevator, it was beginning to close, he could step back into it. Deku chopped the vegetables. I hate it. Izuku flinched back at Bakugo's sudden appearance. He stood a few feet away, drying his hands on a towel, waiting for an answer. Izuku managed a half-breath and a shaky nod, throat too tight to answer. He washed his hands slowly, counting, trying to count, touching the cool metal of the sink. The knife. It wasn't the same. The tip curved down, not pointy. It was different. It was okay. He chopped slow and steady, trying to make a repetitive sound, nodding his head with each downward slide. Up and down. Up and down. Scoop into a bowl for Bakugo. Over and over till there was nothing more to chop and he felt his heart begin to hammer again. Nothing to match pace 2. Desperately, he tapped the knife against the board, chopping imaginary vegetables till his heart slowed again. He wasn't sure if he was breathing. He needed to breathe. He ran through the steps Mrs. Ito gave him. As time dragged on, his heart rate began to slow and the shaking in his hands stopped. Bakugo was still by the stove, eyes fixed on what he was cooking. Izuku inspected his chopping, finding it all right. "Do you need anything else, Kaken?" Bakugo glanced at him for a long moment. "No." Then he picked up the prepared veggies and dumped them into the skillet, setting a lid on top to steam. "I think I'll go to bed early," Izuku said, taking a step back. Bakugo's gaze flicked up again. "You need to eat, Deh. You're too scrawny." Izuku flushed, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "I know you're working with all might," Bakugo continued, turning to Izuku fully. "I'll tell him if you start skipping meals." Izuku flushed brighter, trying to work up a response. "Fine," he eventually grumbled, too tired to come up with something better. He watched curiously as Bakugo pulled a plate from the cabinet and handed it to him, piled with food. When Izuku gave him a questioning look, Bakugo soured. "You're worthless, overworked idiot. Eat and go to bed." Izuku glanced up at the clock as he sat down at the bar top. It was just past 6, but he was really tired. Exhausted even. Down to his bones. Waiting till dinner was ready for everyone and then sitting at the table sounded like torture. Just eating felt like a chore. Not that he had much of an appetite. As he ate, he pulled out his notebook, writing about the panic attack. He scowled at the chunk of pages dedicated to just the last 2 weeks. He didn't even want to think about the new stats Hatsum had on him. The next time he brought the chopsticks to his mouth, they were empty. Izuku frowned down at his empty plate, trying to remember when he finished. He stewed on his confusion as he washed the plate and set it in the drying rack, wondering if he should write it down. Probably. Free time had become a foreign concept since transferring to the hero course, but for once, Izuku had a few free hours during the afternoon on Saturdays. Now that he didn't have to take extra English classes, it gave him a couple hours before training with All Might. He thought about a run, even got dressed for it, but his body still felt exhausted from Wednesday. Mine too, for that matter. Which is why he was watching some home improvement show, letting his eyes zone out to splotches of color. It was incredible. No wonder people paid for this. "Hey, Midoriya," someone said, sitting down on the other couch. Izuku debated for a moment if finding out who it was worth the effort of refocusing his eyes. No, it was not. "Hey," he mumbled, hoping the couple on the TV picked mosaic tile for the backsplash. "I have a favor to ask." Izuku closed his eyes, knowing he'd actually have to engage in conversation now. He looked over at the person, Kirishima. Izuku released a slow breath as panic didn't set in. He searched the red hair, waiting to feel the rush of fear. It never came. He sat back, trying to relax. Kirishima smiled, friendly as ever. "You were friends with Bakugo as kids, right?" Izuku sat up, pulling his feet up under him as Kaminari took a seat on the floor between them. Izuku looked between the two, feeling like he was being cornered. "I wouldn't say that, I mean not really." Kaminari shrugged. "Sure, but you knew him for a long time?" "I mean, yeah, I guess so," Izuku muttered, not sure what favor would have to do with him knowing Bakugo. "I wouldn't say I knew him well." "Well," Kirishima trailed off, looking over at Kaminari. They shared a series of looks like they were silently debating what to say, before Kirishima continued, "We think, since the final, he's been weird." Kaminari nodded, leaning back on his hands. "Yeah, he's been stressed about something, but he won't talk to us about it." Izuku frowned harder, looking between the two. They were closest to Bakugo. If he wouldn't talk to them, there was no way Bakugo would talk to Izuku. "I think you guys misunderstand. We think it has something to do with whatever happened between you two in middle school," Kirishima said quietly, glancing around the common area to make sure it was still empty. Izuku blinked once, then twice, and shook his head. "I never knew Kaken to worry over old stuff like that." Kirishima smiled in a proud manner, letting out a breathy laugh. "He still has a bad attitude and doesn't think first sometimes, but he's been working really hard to become a leader, be better." "Really?" All he wants to do is become the #1 hero, Kirishima explained. Mr. Aizawa pulled him aside the end of our first year and told him a part of being #1 was being able to lead people, especially if he wants to have his own hero agency. That's right. All Kaken talked about when they were younger was being the best. I still don't understand what you want me to do or what happened in middle school. Kirishima sighed, dragging his fingers through his hair. He seemed to think for a moment, glancing at Kaminari, who gave him an unsure hum. I guess we were just hoping you might know what's wrong. It's weird seeing him like this. Unnerving, Kaminari shivered. I want angry, yelling Bakugo back. Izuku smiled a bit. He doesn't seem much different to me. Kirishima's brows rose, the corner of his mouth turning up. You serious, man? He's never let someone help him with dinner. Yeah, he says we'd if it up just looking at it, Kaminari laughed. He's probably right. Oh well, Izuku pulled at the collar of his shirt. I'm sure Kaken is fine. And if there was something bothering Kaken, Izuku had a pretty good idea what it was about. Maybe that was why he was stressed, as Kirishima put it. Was that why he'd been playing the guitar every morning? Over the last few days, Izuku had started looking forward to being woken up by the soft playing. It was always the same song over and over again. Bits and pieces that Izuku would catch himself humming or tapping his pen to. He tried to imagine what Bakugo looked like playing. Curled up on his bed in the low light of early morning, playing quietly. Maybe he hummed the lyrics or nodded his head to the beat, counting measures. Smiling when he got it right. Izuku shook his head to dispel the image. He checked his watch. He still had an hour before training with All Might. Could go for a run or watch more mind-numbing TV. The latter was tempting. Oh, so tempting. But he stood and tossed the remote to Kirishima. A run would be more productive. He considered the path before him. His usual. One that wound around the campus and took about 2 hours to complete. He settled on just getting to the gym early. All Might wasn't there when he arrived, so he decided to enjoy the rare silence, stretching as he did. Hello, Midoriya, All Might greeted. Izuku leaned forward, wincing a bit. What are we doing today? Weights, All Might said, looking through the papers attached to his clipboard. We need to find your new maxes and possibly increase your calorie intake. Again? Izuku whined. He couldn't imagine eating more than he already was. All Might smiled. You've been gaining weight steadily. If you maintain this trend, I think you'll be on par with your peers by the end of summer. End of summer? That was so long. Izuku fell back, glaring at the ceiling. Why can't it go faster? I'm afraid this is just one of those things that take time, All Might chuckled. Let's get started. Izuku dipped and weaved around the swing of the heavy bag. The stress from the last hospital visit had finally worn off completely, and he'd woken up with more energy than he knew what to do with. Even after a busy day of classes and hero training, Izuku felt like he was buzzing. He punched the thick leather till his knuckles felt raw under his warps and his lungs burned. Still not enough. A run wouldn't cut it. Maybe Shinso wanted to spar. Nope, he was busy. Izuku dragged a hand through his hair, glaring down at his phone, scrolling through the much longer list of contacts courtesy of Ishido stealing his phone. He clicked on Bakugo's name and hesitated. He did say to text him if he wanted to spar. But what if he forgot he said that? Izuku narrowed his eyes at the screen, debating. It would be embarrassing if Bakugo just ignored him, which was a very likely thing he would do. Oh hey Midoriya, wanna spar with us? Izuku jumped, having not heard them come in. He looked over his shoulder at Kirishima, Kaminari, and Bakugo. Izuku turned away as he felt heat rush across his cheeks and shoved his phone away. Sure. He squared up with Kaminari. Both he and Kirishima had quirks that were difficult to spar with. If it were a real fight, Izuku would have stopped them before ever engaging. Hey, you're friends with Shinso, right? Kaminari asked, throwing a couple weak punches. Izuku took a few steps back, getting the impression that Kaminari really just wanted to chat. I guess so, he answered with a shrug. We train together pretty often with Mr. Aizawa. Kaminari nodded, dipping under one of Izuku's punches. You got a girlfriend? Izuku stumbled, dropping his fists. No, he squeaked, his cheeks heating up. Really? Kaminari looked Izuku up and down with suspicion. Boyfriend? Izuku slapped a hand over his reddening face. I thought we were sparring? Oh yeah. Kaminari threw a couple more punches, mind completely somewhere else. So, is that a no? No. No, I am not dating anyone, Izuku. Tough. Demon, Kaminari said, walking off the mat to his bag by the wall. I owe Mina $10. He tossed his phone aside, message sent. One more question. Izuku slumped. Hit me. Kaminari stepped back onto the mat wearing another one of his bright smiles. You have to come to movie night with us. That wasn't even a question, but Izuku let it slide. I thought the whole class was already going? Perfect. He turned towards the other mat. Baku bro, SWH with me. Kiri and I have a score to settle. He grinned evilly, rubbing his sparking hands together. Izuku watched them suspiciously as Bakugo came onto his mat. Deku, Bakugo said, getting his attention, try and actually be a challenge this time. Izuku scowled. Fine, but don't get hurt like last time, Baku bro. He grinned as Bakugo's palms crackled. You're lucky we're inside. Bakugo shot forward. Izuku sidestepped, jabbing his elbow into Bakugo's side and jumping out of range of a counterattack. Bakugo wheezed, clutching his ribs, muttering curses. Are you sure it's me who needs to be a challenge? Bakugo spun on him, absolutely livid. Sounds like you're feeling better. Izuku dodged punches and blasts as best he could. Even when knowing they were coming, Bakugo's attacks were fast and hard. Izuku landed on his back with a thud, barely rolling out of the way of one of Bakugo's power punches. His hands were smoking. Izuku pushed himself onto his knees, breathing hard, watching Bakugo cautiously as he too took a breather. You're a real pain in the butt, you know that, Deku? I try, Izuku said, shifting to a sitting position. Another round? Bakugo sat up, a frown creasing his brow. He didn't give an answer, just shot a swiping kick at Izuku. Izuku was shoved back by another blast, smoke curling around him. His arms ached from blocking so much. Your counterattacks are shit. I know. You're slow as hell too. I know. You've been training every day. I've only been doing this for 6 weeks. Izuku dodged another punch combo. He'd noticed Bakugo's attacks getting more technical and less focused on brute force but couldn't decide if it was because he was tired or holding back. He watched as Bakugo's hands started heating up, mentally groaning. If you hadn't lied about having a quirk for 10 FING years, you might actually be good. Izuku jumped out of the way of the attack, stumbling. When he got his footing, he looked back at Bakugo. You're still upset about that? Yeah, I'm still upset, shitty nerd. Izuku dropped his stance, looking at Bakugo curiously, waiting for something to reach out to him that would give him insight into what Bakugo was thinking. Would it have changed things? Bakugo's scowl dropped, washing off his face in a split second. I don't know, he answered, and Izuku knew he was honest. It washed up against him, edged with regret. Bakugo raised his fists again. Izuku mirrored him, ignoring his tired muscles. You know you've got me beat, he said, swaying from foot to foot, ready to counter once Bakugo made a decision on his next move. So, I don't know why you want to fight me. Bakugo paused, fists dropping an inch. God, you're such an idiot. Izuku dodged a punch. You can be so much better. The only time beating you will matter is when you can actually throw a FING punch without almost falling on your DMN face. There were snickers from the peanut gallery. Izuku glared at the other two boys who had given up their spar to watch him and Bakugo. Izuku scowled down at his fists. He held them just like Aizawa had taught him to. Your hands are fine, Bakugo said, coming up beside him. Just do what I do. Izuku matched his stance, a part of him wondering if he was dreaming as he followed Bakugo's actions. Something warmed in his chest. This new Bakugo. Pay attention. Sorry. Izuku looked back at his arms, those arms that were twice the size of his, and matched the motion of a punch. You're throwing with your shoulder, Bakugo pointed out. He placed a hand around Izuku's wrist and another on his lower back. Push with your core and turn with your hips, he said, as he led Izuku through the motion once more. I've noticed you're off balance, this will correct that. Izuku practiced the form till Bakugo gave a satisfied nod. It does feel different, Izuku mused, flexing his sore hands. Of course, it does, idiot, he scoffed, arms crossing over his chest. Off to the side, Kirishima gave a fake sniffle, hanging off Kaminari. He's grown so much. Right before our eyes. Kaminari sobbed, wiping a non-existent tear. I'm so proud. You idiots. Shut the hell up. Izuku stepped off the mat and picked up his things. If it makes you feel better, Mr. Aizawa is starting my combat training this week. He soured, sipping from his water. He also says my form and attacks SCK. Then what have you been doing for the last 6 weeks? Kirishima asked, looking over his shoulder. He wanted me to get some control over my quirk before we started training with it, and with All Might we've only been weight and endurance training. His phone buzzed with a text from Hatsum asking to hang out. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for the spar. Hatsum was so great. Izuku could never fathom how she came up with so many cool and innovative gadgets. He sat on his bed playing with a pair of goggles and the built-in zoom feature. Hatsum lounged next to him against the wall, computer in her lap as she recalibrated the leg stabilizers lying next to her. There's a new first year with a sharp shooting quirk, Hatsum said, brow creasing as she typed in parameters. He uses a bow. There are so many cool things I could put in it. Izuku looked over the sketch and notes surrounding it. Man, he missed this. I'd add a night vision setting to his goggles. Hatsum hummed in agreement beside him, attention fully engrossed in her computer. What if the bow could fold for easier carry? Like with my staff. Looked up, fingers still typing. That's a good idea. I should also add a way for him to attach it to his costume then too. He wrote down the ideas for her. Done, she sighed, shoving the laptop off of her. How did you feel today? Great. The stress from last week finally wore off. Izuku rested back against his pillows, stretching out his sore muscles. Kaken really kicked my butt during our spar. I have so many bruises. Hatsum's brows rose. You two are on sparring terms? Apparently, he said with a shrug. He's definitely different. Good different. Izuku smiled a bit. Old Kaken never would have taught me how to fix my form. He forced himself to sit up, wincing as his abs protested. A lot can happen to a person in 2 years. She narrowed her eyes slightly. 76%. 76% what? She ignored him, instead turning to pack up her computer and babies. 76% what, Hatsum? He jumped off the bed after her. You'll see. If his muscles weren't aching so bad, he'd block the door, but he was forced to lean on the footboard trying to find the will to move his legs. She paused in the doorway, grinning back at him. It's a good thing, I promise. He gave a defeated sigh and limped out of his room, determined to walk her back to her dorm. You really don't have to walk me, Midoriya, she said gently as they exited the 3A dorms. Something could happen, he reasoned. It's late and dangerous. UA has one of the highest level security. I'm not letting you walk home alone, he cut off, jabbing a finger into her side. Villains are always looking for someone to build them illegal support items. You're the perfect target. She laughed hard, doubling over as they walked. If a villain were to try and kidnap me, I'd hit them with baby number 358. Izuku squinted at the device in the darkness. Is it a recording of you talking about thermodynamics? She huffed, cheeks puffing out. It's an electroshock weapon. So, a taser? Oh no, this would definitely put them in a coma. See, she shoved the gadget in his face. I made a specific villain setting. He gave her an incredulous look, rolling his eyes. Of course you did. Izuku stopped at the steps of her dorm, waving goodbye as she entered and turned to head back to his.